So a few months ago, or even a year, I don't know, a long time ago, in 2022 terms, uh, Vaush, who is a YouTuber, pretty prominent live streamer, I think he's a libertarian socialist, debated Charlie Kirk, who's a conservative, and he leads a really big kind of youth action conservative organization called Turning Point USA. Those two debated, and it was a really big deal. They went in person, and I just found it super interesting and super beneficial to myself as far as taking notes on debating and what's effective and what's not. And Vaush is known to be a really good debater, and so I really enjoyed it. And obviously, Vaush is as I mentioned, a libertarian socialist, so we would disagree on a lot of things because I'm not that, but when he's debating conservatives, it's money, because it's more so about debunking the conservative arguments than necessarily diving into all the different kind of more socialist policies that he would go fully into. But the reason I want to go over it today is I just think we can learn a lot as a group about what is and isn't effective and what arguments conservatives will make. And I remember a lot of the topics, and they were things that are still definitely super, super applicable to the political landscape right now. And so, yeah, let's jump into it.
Is critical race theory the biggest threat to America, or is it at least a threat to America? Well, there's a lot of questions around that. Obviously, you guys know my position on this to a certain degree, but there's a lot of other issues we need to talk about. One of the biggest stories right now is that New York has imposed and it's
hosted by Tim Pool.
I don't want to say limited, but it's a vaccine mandate for indoor activities, entertainment performances, and build.
And if you want to watch this debate, just how it happened, then go watch it on your own, because I'm going to be cutting in a lot with thoughts, but I think it'll make it more fun. Bear with me. One of the things is, again, this was kind of right at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, and so there still wasn't many mandates, and that's why they're discussing like the prospect of mandates rather than now where we've already seen some and can kind of talk about real world examples.
De Blasio said the goal here is to encourage people, mostly young people, to get the vaccine. That means if you want to go to the movie theaters, if you want to engage in normal activities like at bars, you have to have a vaccine passport. You have to have proof. They call it T2NYC. Now, why do I bring up critical race theory? Well, for one, you know the title of this video. We're going to have conversation, a political debate or discussion about this. But there is a question some people have brought up due to the low level of vaccination among the black community and how that will disproportionately affect people and whether or not this will be truly equitable. But today, the bigger thing we're doing is not just about the news. It's about a conversation with two prominent individuals in politics. We've got Charlie Kirk, who I'm sure most of you know. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Charlie Kirk, honored to be here. We're going to have some fun.
Do you describe yourself politically in any way? Like,
I guess you could say I'm on the right.
Conservative?
Yeah, more than
guess.
that. And conservative and love of the country.
Right on. Then, of course, we have Vaush. Jonah.
Howdy. Yeah, I'm Vaush. I'm a YouTuber. And I guess I call myself a libertarian socialist. I like some parts of the country. I'm a big fan of some parts of it. Some other parts I think could use some improvement.
Right on. Now we've got Ian here, as per usual.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be in the chat today watching your super chats. So keep sending them in, and I'll be clipping them so that we can get to it at the end of the show. Hi.
And I'm very excited. So I'm just going to interject here. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm going to be switching like a crazy person. And hopefully tonight goes really well and we all learn something new.
And before we jump in, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get an ad-free experience and exclusive access to members-only segments of this show. And I guess I wasn't initially planning on it, but I guess everyone's cool to do a member segment.
So for those who aren't familiar with Tim Pool, I won't dive into it now, but he's one of those people who thinks that he can get more kind of unique points for being a disillusioned liberal type who's I'm not on the right, not really on the left. I just kind of take each issue as it is. But based on a lot of his recent political activity, he's definitely, if you listen to his advocacy, he's definitely on the right. And the annoying thing is he even admitted, he said, I constantly say things that I don't mean. I forget what this was, like talking about on Twitter or something. So that if anyone ever questions a particular tweet of mine, I can just say, oh, that's one of those that I didn't mean. Okay. So that was a summary, but the actual word for word was just as dramatic as that. And he uses that veneer of, oh, I'm kind of in the middle to, I believe, trick people into more right-wing beliefs. But regardless, at least, Charlie's outwardly right-wing, so that's more clear.
And after the show, and we'll find something fun to talk about. So, we'll see how it plays out. So make sure you become a member. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends. If you think this conversation is important, I'm sure there are many right-wing individuals like, get him, Charlie, crush Vaush. And there's a lot of left-wing people being like, Vaush is going to own. Oh, well, share it with your friends and let's have a good conversation. And I suppose we can start with one of two things. Obviously, I brought up critical race theory, but also the vaccine issue. I'm not sure if you guys have a preference for what you were.
We can talk about the vaccine.
Why don't we talk about what's going on with vaccine passports?
Sure.
We've seen in Sydney, for instance, they issued a lockdown. Enough people ignored it. They went out in the streets, and then this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests.
Also, if you're wondering, no, the beanie does not ever come off.
Now they've actually deployed military. So I'm curious if either of you wants to jump in with your thoughts on mandates. What would happen if they came here, if you're for or against them?
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for wallets. It just felt a little bit haphazardly planned from the forego, so that's unfortunate. Maybe they can find other ways to incentivize it, like for example in schools where they have a direct access to government records where they wouldn't have to use those little cards. That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Well, I'm not saying you believe this, but some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical history to try to get into a restaurant in New York City. Yeah, look, I'm not getting the vaccine, so I'm part of the 100 million people that are unvaccinated. And it's an experimental vaccine. The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a ship in the United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came.
I know you all know this, but that's one that people still cite is, oh, this person got COVID and they were vaccinated. Quite literally, never did they say you weren't going to get it if you were vaccinated. They said it will decrease the spread and it'll prevent hospitalizations and deaths.
Down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein and the people that really understand how that works. But yeah, this is medical apartheid. This is trying to create a two-tiered system where if you don't make the proper medical decisions, you're not able to go to Broadway shows or go into restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated country that's about to lock down again. And most of the new cases are from vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients in Israel. So, sorry, you want to interject him, but
Yeah.
obviously against mandates, and I think
I-
people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story we wrote on timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I could probably agree it's alarmism, but it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public.
So-
I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day, not 334. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, a couple of points on this. First of all, it's
Luke, have you seen? Excuse me. Have you seen the Virginia Thomas bombshell? I have not. What is that even about? I'll look it up in a second. Jared, I'm just. Oh, gotcha. You're doing something else, listening. Perfect. And then he also said, I do think they need to stop calling it a vaccine. Just don't know a better term. But who needs to stop calling it vaccine? We should stop calling the COVID vaccine a vaccine? Do you mean the mRNA because it's a different technology, or how so? And let me know if y'all don't like when it's sped up. It's a almost 2.5 hour debate, 2.5 hour long debate. So it would take forever to get through otherwise.
experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects, it's because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period of time. Ergo, the fact of the matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
Let me ask you a question.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated. But if you take a look at, this is like data mining. If you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated. You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated. In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated, the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
That's something that, first of all, when you...
So one of these things that I'm kind of interested in pointing out throughout this debate, because I think it'll help any of y'all who are interested in having conversations with conservatives and kind of effectively delivering your argument. One of the things that he just did here, it's not that noticeable the first time, but then he does throughout the entire debate, Charlie Kirk that is purposefully, that's a bad way to say it, try to pelt as many questions at whoever the liberal is, or whoever on the left, Vaush in this case, to do two main things. First, kind of fluster them, and if they can't answer every single question with specifics, oh well, there we go, got you type vibe. But then also, if you ask enough questions, regardless of the legitimacy of any given one, you're absolutely going to come off to people, really everyone, but especially people who aren't read in on what you're talking about, as having some legitimate point in there. Because all these questions, and you'll see he does throughout the whole debate. What about this? Well, what about this? Oh, well, what about that? You know? Then as a listener, you go, okay, well, Vaush debunked that one question, or kind of alleviated that one concern, but wow, he just listed off like 8. So clearly there must be some truth in there. And it's dangerous and an effective debate strategy in a sense, but it also comes off just kind of dumb. Like, well, what about this? What about this? Well, say what you're trying to say. Why are you asking me that question?
You take a look at that, you have to recognize that even if that was the case,
Which the FDA says it is.
right? Well, they're looking into it, of course. It
No,
does seem-
they issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big deal.
could issue, of course. They're looking into it, and that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse
See?
Event Reporting System?
Hold on.
Where
Well,
there's
well, first-
I'm just curious because
I don't know, Charlie. What is your opinion of VAERS? Just say what you want to say. Oh my gosh. This is something that happens so much. When I've debated conservatives too, this is how it starts. They say, not all of them, tons of my conversations are beautiful, but they'll say, I believe this. And then I'll challenge them on that and push, maybe provide some evidence. And then from my perspective, it seems like once they get a little uncomfortable with the stability and the strength of their point, they just start asking a bunch of kind of sometimes conspiratorial, but just sometimes alarmist questions about a bunch of things. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And try to catch me in going, I don't know. One note I'll say, and then I'll try to play more before I interject again. I remember watching Vaush talk about his preparation for this debate, and he was just saying that his goal was to stay super calm, level-headed, intellectual the entire time, because in debating someone like Charlie, if you can come off just as super, yeah, here's my answer, and not get really inflamed, you have a better chance of coming off as kind of the winner or more effectively delivering your points.
Let's do the Guillain-Barré syndrome, though. I think you want to.
Yeah, so of course, stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless the extent of that potential nerve damage is just apocalyptically severe, that the effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more manageable.
So I just want to play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think that's I think it's delicious.
Wait, hold on. That's an extremely dishonest talking point.
Well, you're peddling the Pfizer vaccine. You're saying it's so effective. So many people have taken it. But I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer.
This is let's talk about the points he's made. And
no, I was just enjoying the irony.
Well, the thing is, it's not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand.
Oh, so annoying. Okay. What the point he's about to make, I don't want to just get ahead of him, but the point that Vaush is going to make, but it's just evidence and data is evidence and data, okay? And whenever organizations are required to provide that to you, you can then verify it / make sure that people who are experts in whatever the industry or area that you're talking about, that they look at the data and verify it. And so, yes, the pharmaceutical companies are terrible in many ways and have done bad things. But they also have an incentive to create a really effective vaccine because that's going to make them a bunch of money because everyone's going to want it. If they put out a bad vaccine and the medical experts say, don't take this, that's not going to be good for them. And there's no way you can believe that since 99% of all medical experts are advocating for this vaccine, that every single one of them is somehow in the pocket of the big pharma, in the pocket of big pharma.
See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spend months and months and months developing these vaccines. I'm
Who's getting rich
very big
from
fan.
this vaccine?
Well, hold on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system?
Who do you think gets
behind
rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine mandates?
The
workers or the Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless.
Isn't that your whole shtick?
This is a toothless critique that you could.
Let's try and go back and forth.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit of CEOs.
We don't mandate it, and so you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of 4 major pharmaceutical medicines.
Wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism,
that's one of many.
Then you should. So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far. But whether or not that's on the table,
so that was the perfect response, because Vaush believes, in nationalizing the big pharma. What am I saying? The pharmaceutical industry, the big pharma. And he knows that Charlie would never want to have, government controlled pharmaceutical industry. Guys, I'm falling apart. Because he knows that, it's the perfect thing to shut down this whole, it's so ironic, by saying, I know, that's why I'm in favor, and you can agree with me, I guess, since you're criticizing them, that we should nationalize the entire industry. Oh, nice.
I can't just make that happen. When we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine, it seems to be effective. That's not a praise of the capitalist industry behind it.
No, I was just enjoying the irony.
It's not irony.
Well, it's totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us, and you're the one that's saying it's super effective.
Wait, what?
Usually, if we were wearing our traditional uniforms, right versus left, it would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment I'm making
is what do you have to say about VAERS, though?
Vaccine.
What do you have to say about the vaccine adverse event reporting system that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
the VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally used.
Do you think
to
it's
form accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is?
Look at how many questions Charlie's pelting. Say what you believe, Charlie. That's what the debate's supposed to be, back and forth. You're arguing what you do believe. But instead, it's just this interview of Vaush, pretty much, but in a really hyperbolic manner. And yeah, the VAERS thing, before VAERS was the talking point, people were already saying, the vaccine, blah, 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 blah. And then they latched onto the self-reported site where you can go and say, I had an adverse health event because of the vaccine. Anyone can go on. We could go on right now, put anything we want. And they pretend like, well, I mean, so don't you think that people are telling the truth? And there's two main elements. First off, no, for a lot of them, because before this site was even a public discussion, it's been around for a super long time, but before it was this conservative talking point, they were already fear-mongering about the vaccine. So then once that becomes a talking point, of course people are going to go on there and self-report. If they feel like the vaccine's bad, I'm going to make sure that it seems like it's even worse. But the second element is, even if you're a completely honest person, just like how, have you ever, something super dumb, like, let me think, like something superstitious. Oh, this one morning I didn't do my normal like morning shower or whatever, and the rest of the day I was so off my game. And then you think like, oh, that's because I didn't do my shower. Something happens with my mind. Most likely, that's just a mental thing. That's what I think happens with this, is people just blame, oh, I had a heart attack 3 weeks after getting the vaccine. Well, whenever you give a vaccine to millions of people, random people were already going to get heart attacks. So just statistically, it's going to happen that some of those people also had the vaccine somewhere close whenever millions of people are getting vaccinated at once. You have to be able to prove the cause was from the vaccine, which is not something that we've seen with the COVID vaccine.
That's right. Can you tell me what VAERS is?
Yeah, VAERS is a government website that physicians or individuals can submit complaints or concerns after an adverse event report from a vaccine. Since you cannot win in court against a vaccine production company, then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction.
Right.
That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it, because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything, because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I
ask you because I want to know, how do you arrive at the conclusion that, how many people did you say
Well,
applied?
it's VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which, by the way,
That anyone can submit.
No,
I'm asking,
by the
how
way,
do you
most of which
arrive-
are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these
the
are
total number.
Most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family doctors or local physicians. So I'm just asking, what number of adverse event reactions would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking,
10,000 deaths.
how do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and it just gets put up
This
there.
is
and we're
this is the
saying that's
question.
because of the
Usually, a
vaccine?
vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when you call time out
Wait,
and say maybe we should
You're not answering the
mandate
question.
it.
How do you know that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the point.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't either. But the position is, let's mandate experimental medicine. We don't know actually what's
Well,
happening.
if you don't know, then how can you say that medical doctors are the one uploading this information? Is there any
because
methodology you're
we,
looking at
we
to
do
determine
know
these
who's
deaths were
actually
from it?
uploading it. We know that. We know the entries are usually
What are
and
the claims
typically
being made?
traditionally. How about menstrual cycle disruption, loss of nerve capacity, unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages?
So, I missed the figure because I was reading something else, but it was either 7,000 or 15,000 that he said people have reported. Yeah, that makes so much sense. If you give a vaccine to millions of people and there's an entire movement saying that the vaccine's dangerous without any evidence, the fact that out of those, and I'm sure some of them aren't even vaccinated saying stuff, but let's say that all of them were vaccinated and actually experienced something, I could totally see out of millions of people like 7,000 or even 15,000, later they have a terrible migraine. They think it was the vaccine. Later they, even more serious, all these things, they have a miscarriage. Just statistically, those things happen often enough. And whenever you give a vaccine to enough people, it's just going to line up where it's even without any causality, people still perceive it to be the vaccine's fault because they got it like a week ago and then they got in a car wreck a week later. And I use that example because no one would ever blame that on the vaccine. But that to me is a similar analogy to whenever people blame health things on a vaccine they got recently or the vaccine they got recently is a similar thing. Enough people get in car wrecks where I'm sure tons of people got in a car wreck within 3 weeks of getting the vaccine. So was the vaccine causing them to get in car wrecks? Of course not. But people don't do that type of math in their head with the vaccine. Again, if I saw any evidence in any of the data that's out there on this vaccine that it was causing things, then I would be very concerned, of course. But you can't just have people self-report that they're having adverse health events. I'm going to talk less, I promise. We're going to get through this in less than 10 hours. No kidding. And to kind of put a cap on that. When you have a system, I think it's great. People go self-report. People can look into it. And so far, when they go look into people's self-reporting, it's not seen to have caused whatever that health event was.
Mood changes. Also, you can go through the VAERS database, like, oh, that's interesting.
Mood changes. What about the death?
Let me interject
Death
something
is
real quick.
7,000 plus. That's a serious.
How do they know it's from the vaccine? I keep asking you this. You don't
Let me address 2 points, one from each of you, real quick, so we can try and. How do we know it's from the vaccine? It's a difficult question. I would say.
I'm so sorry. So, to what I was previously saying, 7,000 people to die somewhat recently, and a lot of those could be completely rando. Like people go report, and it's not even honest. I've seen people do this, like online. They've been like, "Oh, look, I'm gonna put this on VAERS." But additionally, even people who actually did die out of that 7,000 batch somewhat recently, like, yeah, that's gonna happen when millions of people have the vaccine and thousands of people die all the time. At some point, it's gonna line up where it seems close.
If you have a mass vaccination program which gives out 330 million doses or so, and then people start saying, hey, I got the vaccine, then this happened, VAERS isn't here to say it is or isn't. They're here to say, can we find a pattern in this? And I think 7,000 suggests there may be one at the very least. I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a side
I
effect
always mispronounce it.
Guillain-Barré. There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
My understanding is actually a side effect of many vaccines.
Yeah, it is.
And so
Totally, that's correct. It could be.
Well, so the issue I have is one of the things that Vaush brought up is that there's been, how many you mentioned, 100 million, 160 million? 115, I think it is, million.
Who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So, of course, if you have something very different from any other vaccination we normally do, because we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, and so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights. Yield to rights. Allow people to say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example, I'm 27. I don't consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that. So the American system, Constitution, kind of like the tradition, is to be able to have people have nuance, preferences, and individualism when it comes to these sort of complex issues. Not saying you can't go to a restaurant because we want you to take experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights, the Supreme Court found over a century ago that when it came to vaccinations, this was a special exemption from some people's rights to.
I will agree with you that the courts are not on my side.
He's going to make the point that
and there's a reason why, because of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine, but I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably, if it continues to circle the world long enough, and this is an international problem, not just an American one, new strains will develop, which will slowly ebb at the effectiveness of this set of vaccines. So it threatens all of us. May I say one other thing?
Yeah,
sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak to VAERS, VAERS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. The two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a quick
they
clarification.
experience to vaccines.
Sorry.
Just quick clarification. Are you for mandating the COVID-19 vaccine?
The same way we have other vaccines like school, travel, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone wanted to go to a restaurant or a supermarket or a movie theater?
I think that, I mean, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just going to be honest.
People
That's-
are panicking.
No, I think that's a more,
people
well,
die.
yeah.
I just want to make sure we weren't having misunderstanding.
No, I
over
think that's
whether-
more of a reasonable answer. I just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general. Are you concerned by like Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved, and
He didn't invent it. I don't think Vaush effectively argues against this because I don't think he was aware of it. This Malone character that's been touted so many times. Oh my God. He invented it. 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 And he's saying it's bad. He was one of the people who researched mRNA technology decades ago, like when it was first being looked into, among tons of people who were looking into it. It wasn't like him and his doctor buddy invented this technology. He was one of the people writing and researching on it. Okay. And then he had a falling out with a bunch of the people. He felt like he didn't get credit and this and that and the other. And got very antagonistic towards the organizations that he was working with through this process. Hasn't been involved and worked on the technology in decades, and thus is so far removed from this specific vaccine, and has a lot of incentives to be the guy who goes against it. And then again, even and this is a lot of times what people that I disagree with do, is they find a person who shares their view and quote what they say and say, see, you have medical professionals, I have medical professionals. But the difference is your medical professional, first of all, as I explained, has a history that would lead him to do something like this. But then also, and you're lying about, or at least heavily implying a lie, that he played a bigger role in this vaccine than he actually did. And then the other element is when you watch him speak on this, I'm sorry, again, I'm ranting. This is going to be like a super long thing if you want to consume over a super long time or watch parts of it. I can't help myself. And there's so many good topics I want to talk about later in this debate. But if you watch him talk, he doesn't cite the proper evidence you need to prove his point. Whereas the medical professionals that I would cite, we could go look at, and that's what I do, and that's what anyone is able to do. The evidence that they're citing, the methodology behind the studies that they're pointing to, and you can verify what the people who you're using to verify your own point are saying. Whereas the people they cite a lot of times, sure, they had some history in medicine or something, and then you go look at their speakings on and what they put out on their concerns, in this case about the vaccine, and they don't provide the proper proof or evidence for their views. So, okay, I don't care if they have doctor ahead of their name. Regardless, I want a medical professional to also cite evidence to me.
Urges people to think twice before getting it. Does that move you at all?
Well, you're free to speak with your doctor when it comes to
Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. The guy who invented this type of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved in the production of these vaccines.
No, he literally invented this type
the
of
mRNA,
vaccine.
but with the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, the Moderna.
But he's very, very aware of this sort of accelerated implementation. He's trying to call time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine. Does that worry you? His claim is that it involves a spike protein. It was rushed to market. It's going to have side effects. You don't understand it like I did. I invented this. And you got to think twice before mandating it or even taking it if you're under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current retinue of vaccines that we take, the mRNA process, different from other mRNA
It doesn't involve the
vaccines?
spike protein. According to him, the same composition as like the measles, mumps, rubella type vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine.
Well, those weren't mRNA. The process wasn't developed back during the MMR vaccine.
Totally. But some of them are getting updated for the more mRNA type technology,
But
right?
if he wasn't involved in the production of these modern vaccines, how could he possibly have any comment on any of the rigors or tests that were done
Because he
before?
invented this type of vaccine. I'm just saying, does that bother you? Do you think he's just like a fear propagandist and like...
No, he may well have concerns, but those are concerns that I would rather have addressed by the scientific community rather than, with respect to you and myself, YouTubers.
Well, no, I agree. So, but the question is which scientists, right? So there's a lot of scientists speaking out against this. Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dr. Malone.
What
right?
is Dr. Brett Weinstein's
He's an
specialty?
evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how
That's not virology.
cellular function
No,
works.
that is not virology. That is a
He's an evolutionary biologist. So that makes him like credible to speak on a vaccine? Is he an epidemiologist? I don't know why that's so difficult. You do realize all medicine and then all science aren't the same. Like, you don't get one PhD and then you know all of like science. People specialize in certain areas, and those are the people we should go to. And then again, not blindly trust them. They have the responsibility of also providing. We should give weight to their word because they understand the evidence and the processes better than we do, but then we can also go verify. Whereas Brett Weinstein, I've watched his speaking. Again, it's the exact same as any other conspiracy theories, just coming out of the mouth of a evolutionary biologist. Oh, that's the same thing as an epidemiologist or virologist. Okay, Charlie.
a completely spurious
So let me just,
association.
do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been wrong about everything.
It's about the global. Well, hold on. He's smiling with glee here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
You mean like the WHO? Like
no, not. Hold on. Wait,
put
please,
a name
please.
behind it.
Wait, he's very excited. Interrupt me.
Yeah, let's-
no,
let's-
I just want to say it's not just about the WHO. We are talking about a unified effort on the part of virtually every country on Earth to get a hold of the vaccines that us Americans are privileged to have. This isn't just some. This isn't some like pharmaceutical Dr. Fauci push that wasn't broadly supported by any of the relevant experts in the mRNA field, which is not huge because it's a very new development. Internationally, there is a demand for these vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that the vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast, they show the post, the FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand is trust. Like you mentioned, you said, do you trust Fauci or Weinstein? I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust or the organizations you trust. It's a clash of who you believe, to be honest.
none
No,
of us
that's not. Again, oh gosh, this is so many rants to go on right now. This is like when people say, "Well, you have your studies, I have my studies." There is truth. Like there is a truth in every situation. I mean, there's gray areas, of course, but I'm saying in the study example, when people, I watched some debate recently, and someone cited a study, and the other person went, "Well, I have this study from this, that, the other. See, we both have studies. What are we gonna do?" And this is why people who do studies have to so rigorously for them to be respected in any way, the study and the individual, cite the method they used, the specifics of the study, all of the variables they took into account, and then obviously the details of all the results. And so, again, you can go and use your reading eyes and read the original text of the released study and understand where gaps may have been, or in the case of the debate that I'm talking about that I was watching, the point it was making was not even what he was saying. So he was just citing it, because I looked at the study and it didn't even show the results he was saying. Just the headline of it implied something, and then that wasn't what the study actually proved. So don't fall into that, because I've had people who are real smart and go, "Yeah, but I have realized, everyone kind of has their study." No, you can have them cite it. Obviously, it's hard to do in this format, but then go look into it. And if you don't feel comfortable, send it to somebody else who you know is like maybe a little bit more a specialist in that field or something, and say, "Can you look over this? Is this legitimate?" That's a lot to do in a debate format. But my point is, so many times people will cite studies and say, "Well, I have mine, you have yours," and when they look into mine, they can't break down why it would have either gotten the results it got, or prove that it isn't saying what I am saying that it's saying. Whereas with theirs, all the time I can do that. And if someone does that to my point, then I need to give up that point if there isn't any real evidence about what I'm trying to prove.
Have the credentials to just come up
But
with
in this example, okay, see, you have the people you trust, he has the people he trusts. What are we going to do? Well, one of the people that we trust has the correct answer, or they're both wrong. But let's look into the people that we trust's evidence and what they're actually saying, and if they are effectively proving the things they're saying rather than just making a bunch of statements. Then we go, well, they made that statement and they seem really smart, or they're a doctor, so that's the person I trust.
these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose to believe. However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the fact that it doesn't take a virologist to notice that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see. I can see it
Can I ask you a
happening.
question,
That's
though?
pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID, as it's brought up, where people would say something like it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID rarely, like,
I'm reading all your comments just so people can watch this kind of in a more entertainment style form later. I'm going to leave it up on the channel. I'm not going to read through all of them, but just out loud, but I am reading them and appreciate them.
directly kills you. Like age, it causes a breakdown in other vital functions that then their death can be attributed to such. So, for example, of the many things that people die, it's not really COVID, it's just that COVID blanks their entire system internally, and eventually something fails, something breaks, and they die. There were people claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case, because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess, starting when COVID started, that almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, I can't
Just in
trust.
case you missed that point, because it's so important. If you hear people say, I think the COVID death numbers are way over dramatized. I heard that hospitals are getting paid per COVID patient, so they want to identify more people as COVID patients. And I heard that anytime someone has COVID and they die of anything, they're citing it as a COVID death. The point he just made is so important, and this is why I love this debate, because they touch on so many important things. But it's also why this is going to take so long for me to get through, because I want to comment on all of them. There is like he mentioned, a certain pattern of deaths that we have in the United States, and the gap, or the growth in the years that we're talking about in our per year death rate is the exact size, not exact, but is close to the same size as the death toll of COVID. So what happened? Why is there all of a sudden this random block of deaths that isn't usual? That's why. If these were all being overly dramatized, you would not see the excess death numbers line up perfectly with the COVID numbers that are being reported. Again, I'm saying perfectly as in the exact, in a very ballpark manner. Perfectly is kind of how I'm saying it, but nothing like what conservatives pretend is this massive, and not just conservatives, I'm not going after them, but usually them, this massive inflation of COVID numbers.
Trust or distrust, I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me. And these doctors are very smart people. And then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. And I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you. However,
the age
to
of
mandate
70?
it for schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, that's where I'm going to push back against it.
Well,
it's
real
rather
quick,
complex
let me
medical decisions.
They
are
are
complex
The
medical
Johnson &
decisions.
Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. Is that's my understanding?
I don't want to speak out of turn.
I believe so.
Yeah,
I
I
would
think
love to be
that's right.
fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory's
So
faulty.
I guess another question I have, what do you think of alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine,
question.
ivermectin? Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because hydroxychloroquine studies have found it largely ineffective. There was, I believe, a French study that stopped when
just
people
did a-
started dying of heart failure.
He said hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I just did a video. You should go watch it about how ivermectin is not effective, and more data is coming out on that. And why would we encourage people to take treatments that are not proven to be effective, like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, when we have something that is effective?
Failure. I think the only reason the right dies on this hill is because Trump mentioned it. I don't think there'd be a push for it otherwise. The vaccines are the effective way of getting mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID. Even young, healthy, no other problems. True. It is true that death is most comorbid with age and pre-existing conditions, but still, and that's not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now you are on Delta, but if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad this could get?
So Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative to mRNA if you're concerned about it.
And there was some guidance with the nerve disease with that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do think we kind of overlooked something really interesting is that when did we mandate vaccinations in public schools?
Well, I know the Supreme Court case concerning this was in 1904,
Yeah.
so I would know it would have to have been earlier than that. I know that Washington even had his troops vaccinated, though I forget.
For smallpox.
Yeah.
Smallpox, was it?
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to think
Inoculated, not vac. Yeah, you're right.
about. Well, I don't know what they did, hit people with a rock and then
It was
pour
like
liquid
a
in.
needle, I think.
It was
and they would prick you with the needle that had like a weakened sample or something.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's,
I know, like someone
Okay.
pouring it and then
Funny,
today it's just
can
a
we
machine
move
that
on?
makes it.
it's just wild to think about.
Well, so, man, I think the real issue for the most part is just mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these four companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are big pharma and they pursue profits, which generally, as a libertarian socialist, you're skeptical of? Do you think maybe they might have nefarious motives?
Oh, their intentions are reprehensible. They have for many years made money off the backs of American deaths. The opioid crisis is almost entirely attributable to the
And the
malfeasance.
Sackler family.
Yeah, I mean, no moral love for these companies. If this could be, and by the way, the mRNA process was developed through public funding. It was, an effort invested in by the collective good, something I'm generally supportive of. When it comes to these companies themselves, and when I say, go get your Pfizer vaccine, whatever, please do not mistake this or anything else that I say for an endorsement of the practices of these companies. It is only through cruel twist of fate and the economic system we live in that they were the ones put in a position to handle this. But it was the workers at those companies, not the CEOs, who did the work.
I'm just curious. Does that ever make you stop short and say, maybe they're trying to massively inoculate us on a vaccine that might not be as effective to try to pursue profit, not well-being?
The CEOs, a lot of times, I'm sure, of Pfizer, don't even know. They wouldn't be able to know the first thing about how to develop a vaccine. That's just my assumption. They're probably just business men and women. So acting like the corruption and immorality of executives at these large pharmaceutical companies at all reflects on the workers at those companies and all the medical professionals who have looked at the data from these drugs makes no sense.
Does that ever enter into your
It's a
calculation?
consideration. It's a consideration you should take about anything produced by any company that's run for profit, which is everything. Basically every need in American society is tempered by the knowledge that there are people out there who are paid very large salaries to sell it to you. This is the case for everything we do, everything we eat. Every time you run down Main Street, or in my case, I guess, the boulevards in Los Angeles, you're seeing the protracted efforts of $1 billion industry to make sure you want things they're selling. Could that be the case for COVID? Undeniably, there was a profit incentive involved. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. And there was probably a protracted effort on the part of these companies to make sure they were the first. And they probably took every dirty advantage they could get. With the data available, I have to still, much as I would say, hey, I would prefer eating McDonald's food to starvation, I have to say this is probably still something we should be doing.
Do you want to do? I don't want to stay. It's been 20 minutes.
No,
so
for
do you
sure.
Do you want to make a final point?
Maybe you would starve instead.
I
of
actually think
McDonald's,
this has been really constructive and not like that, inflammatory.
No.
I think that
You
deep
just asked a
down you
bunch of
have this kind of,
questions.
urge that I'm already there, where maybe they want this thing to go on for another decade to go make another $100 billion. And maybe the cheap drug of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin might work better than they might think.
I don't have that urge.
Other studies would disagree with you earlier. We could change the topic.
The point that I heard someone else make when they were reviewing this video is if he thinks that the profit motive of the pharmaceutical companies trumps the profit motive of literally every other industry or not every other, but the global market profit motive for COVID to end. You know how bad COVID has been? for our economies generally as the world market is concerned. It's been horrible. And the idea that there's this big conspiracy to make the pharmaceutical companies more money, to like keep COVID going on, an ineffective vaccine, just flies in the face of logic in a way I rarely see.
I just think it's
So
that was a healthy discourse.
Can I meet in the middle on that one, on that very last one?
Yeah.
I do not trust the pharmaceutical industries, though the available evidence does seem to point to the effectiveness of the vaccines. I say this, nationalize the pharma industry. Seriously. It could be used for the collective good, and I would unironically actually trust it more in the hands of our ineffective, bloated government than I would the sociopaths who run it currently. And
So
I mean that.
I'll wrap this up by saying, always talk to your doctor. This is one of the biggest things. Like YouTube is very strict on this, especially. But I genuinely think this is the right answer. If you're watching this, don't assume anyone here is right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think Charlie's made a bunch of good points, and you have. Ultimately, it's down between you and your doctor. And I'll stress, for whatever your opinion, Charlie, I understand. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin haven't been approved by the FDA, and so that's just another.
We're just asking questions whether it works or not.
So that's why I think it's really important, because I think there are. I got to be honest. In regards to ivermectin, people have been eating horse paste that they sell. I looked up what the FDA says about it. They say do not do this, and they actually give a very good reason. They say although people are claiming that if an animal can take it, someone else can. That's not true. There's some things that dogs can't have that humans can. Right. So please talk to your doctor, and I definitely hope we can continue having debates about this stuff, because that was vastly important. I'm really glad you guys were able to have that conversation.
I hadn't even heard of the horse paste thing. That's
Yes.
horrifying.
Ivermectin is technically a drug for horses. It's off-label use.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a dewormer, and so you can go to like Tractor Supply, and they have a sign that says like "Do not eat this," and please.
Any drug for horses will burn a human out from the inside. Those
like
things
mine, yeah.
you've been to they're titans. They're like,
So let's talk about the other big topic, critical race theory. That's the one that I had a terrible answer, absolutely, when you asked me about it. And it was because I think my approach to it was too surface level cultural. So the last time we had Vaush on, when you asked me about it, I couldn't give you a good answer. And I think we can talk about what's happening in schools, the things they're teaching children. And I don't know if either of you has an opinion and wants to start off with.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so there are two CRTs. There's the critical race theory that I know of, which is a highly esoteric, essentially elective class that you can take in some law schools that teaches you a variety of incredibly eclectic legal theories some of which I like and some of which I think I disagree with. And then there's the critical race theory that people like Christopher Rufo have been trying to push, a sort of catch-all term to describe all anti-racism. We see these anti-CRT bills being put through state legislators, and a lot of them don't even mention critical race theory. They mention stuff that's been boilerplate anti-racist theory for like 2 centuries. That stuff really concerns me. If I think that academia is to an extent sacred, of course, all the good things in our society now were born in the halls of academia. The Enlightenment, our democracy, the fair trial that we enjoy if we're arrested, these were things that were originally considered to be the crackpot initiatives of academics, and only through the respect of those ideas have we arrived at, well, what we have today. So if there are problems within academia, I would have them solved in academia, not through the big hand of government reaching in and censoring everyone who says something that disagrees with some political party.
So a point of clarification, you don't believe that critical race theory is in schools?
I think that maybe there are ideas which overlap with critical race theory, but there's always going to be overlap between academic ideas. I mean, I drank water, so did Hitler, one of those type situations.
I think you're coming at it from in good faith, where you're technically correct here that the super academic way of defining critical race theory is not being taught to 4th graders, right? With that being
so. It'd be pretty
with
tough
that
for
being
them.
said, it's almost like saying, we're not teaching advanced geometry to 4th graders, but we are teaching them, very basic math, right? We'll get them the Euclidean geometry. So the very basics of this are definitely in schools. And there's many examples of this, right? The National Education Association literally came out in their press release and said that they are going to push for, and their word was critical race theory, just so we're clear. They use that term, right? That's not Christopher Rufo, that's not James Lindsay, who are good friends of mine. That's the National Education Association, right? And I think they might even be talking about something different than the Delgado theory of critical race theory, right? And so what I want to try to do here, Tim, is we can talk about critical race theory as an academic theory, or we could use a filler term like wokeism, which is more like racial justice, which I actually think would probably be, we can call it racial justice and meet in the middle, right?
I really feel like there are probably 4-digit number of people in America who are studied on actual critical race theory, not including myself.
And
by the way.
I'm not even prepared to do that. But I'm happy to talk about racial justice education and wokeism, which I think
is sort of what the discourse is centered on.
Well, I think you guys actually agree in essence that the academic critical race theory there's overlap with a component in schools, but what we often hear is someone will say critical race theory is being taught to my kids, and then someone will say cite one author of critical race theory that we've brought up in school, and the issue is we refer to it as I believe it's called critical race praxis. So this is something different than critical race theory. It's being implemented in education, but that's why you said wokeism. And
I just think that discussion is so unhelpful when Joy Reid and Christopher Rufo are screaming at each other, and Joy Reid is saying like it's not being taught anywhere. Christopher Rufo, so yes it is. When in reality they're both right. They're just talking about two completely different things.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
No,
Like,
no, I do. And Christopher Rufo has admitted this is like a kind of tactic. Critical race theory does sound spooky. You know, I get a little shiver when I say it. Whereas stuff like anti-racist theory or structural racism maybe compel a little bit more thought when discussed on. It's kind of a moral panic that, in principle, I really disagree with. But if you want to talk, I mean, we can call it wokeism if you want. That's probably a more accurate term.
I will just say, to the point about Christopher Rufo, white supremacist is also used as a catch-all term in the other direction.
If we're talking, I mean, in academia, the term white supremacist is virtually never used. It's sort of a common parlance.
what I will say, though, to give credit to Christopher Rufo, is that this is all kind of downstream from the conversation that Marcuse and Delgado started.
Yeah, well,
it really is.
Well, let's talk about that. But just one thing, though, since we're operating under the blanket wokeism, which is a really broad term, let's talk about like specific ideas, because I'm sure there are some of them that I can provide a good defense for, and some of them
So,
I
like,
might
how about like
disagree with.
black-only dormitories?
Generally not a fan. I think that I don't think they're like explicitly harmful in the same way that traditional segregation is, but I also think that it incentivizes bad types of socialization, where the way that you get a reprieve from the faults of society is to find comfort in people of your own race. Maybe that incentivizes some bad stuff. In my university, we had safe spaces, but you know what they were? They were like chilled, like coffee break rooms behind like
Where'd
the
you go?
Latin. I went to Humboldt State.
Okay.
And right behind there, and like anyone could go in there, whatever. Just the only thing that they asked was that you not be like a dick. But as long as you met that qualification, that was fine. That, to me, that's a good safe space. Maybe that works, you know?
So just had to go through more.
Go for it, please.
Yeah,
No,
so
hit me.
I think this is actually really helpful. So how about reparations for slavery?
I think I'm pretty in favor of that, yeah.
Okay,
It's
make the argument.
just an owed debt. We said 40 acres and a mule. We never paid it. And unfortunately, the material reality for a lot of people who were slaves didn't change that much after they were emancipated. I mean, if you were a slave and you're made free, that's a big step up, don't get me wrong, but you have nothing. I mean, nothing. And because of the way generational wealth transfers from father to son or mother to either to anyone to their children, caught me there. Unfortunately, we still see the consequences of that borne out. You can actually look county by county. Where were slaves kept? Which were the plantation counties? And you see, oh, this group of black like neighborhoods, that's where they settled after slavery ended. It's like really immediate stuff, and it's a debt that this nation never paid.
I don't necessarily agree on reparations, but I think we need to clarify what that ultimately means. But I will say, I've long held the same position. I actually worked on a documentary. There's an issue of people who were enslaved, then they were released, and they were not given any means to actually develop and grow. And so there's a generational wealth gap between people based on race for these historical reasons. The challenge I see, I suppose, is, you know, we've done a lot to amend the laws and change them. For instance, you know, redlining and blockbusting have become illegal, and now we're dealing with an ultimately, I believe, is a class issue. Of course, racism still exists. But anyway, I digress on that point. What I wanted to get to is specifically on reparations. What do you view reparations as? More importantly,
So this is a big divide. Some people think like cash payments. I'm not a big fan of that. It doesn't fix the problem, for one. It's if you can put money into that community, but there's been research done on how long a dollar stays in a black neighborhood as opposed to a white neighborhood. And if a black neighborhood, all of the businesses are owned by, you know, corporate.
Just in case y'all are curious, I totally agree with what he's saying here. A huge investment in lasting change, I think, is a much more effective and politically likely, like something you'd actually be able to get done, rather than, but then more importantly, I think it would do more positive change than just direct cash payments, because that gets weird too. Like, how do you make people come prove that they're descendants of slaves, or is it just the way that you look, or and then again, like he's saying, tons of data has shown, and by that I mean studies have been done that show a dollar in a black community, because of the way that our current kind of economic landscape is set out or laid out, vanishes much quicker. And so that would be a very short term kind of, it would be purely symbolic. It wouldn't do material good, in my opinion.
Boards that are all majority white, eventually the money filters out and you get a very temporary boost in living situation, not much long-term structural change. I'm a big fan of structural reparations, not based on race, but rather based on targeting neighborhoods that need it the most. Some of these neighborhoods are like white, you know, I passed through some of them on my way out from Ronald Reagan Airport. I can tell which parts of this country, you can see it in the bones of the neighborhood. And I think that a new proper reparations project, a new deal even, would go a long way. Get some
well, so
work
you're
crews
saying
out
not even
there.
based on race?
I think that we should recognize that this is largely a racial project, because unfortunately poverty and race are really intertwined in this country. But in terms of applying it, I think that it would be much more healthy if we treated it like a collective effort to bring up the lowest sort of echelon of our economic.
So I want to ask you,
Yes.
Charlie, would you agree with a program that was in how do I try this? Explained as reparations, but was not based on race, went to people based on class and neighborhood, so that it could help Latinos and white people and Asians and everybody.
First of all, I'm against reparations. I just don't like the word because it kind of implies this intergenerational type guilt or allowance that I kind of reject, and I'm happy to build that out further. Do I agree that the question is mostly...
You reject the word? The word, if I'm not mistaken, is... Yeah, it's synonymous with repair, reparations. It's just repair. And yeah, we're repairing an intergenerational damage that was done. But in the process, we're also, at least under what Vaush is advocating for, and something that I would be similarly in support of, is we're repairing, but then recognizing that people of all races have existed at the bottom and currently exist at the bottom of our economic ladder, and so we'll help raise everybody up.
Class? Oh, absolutely. And I think that Vaush is hitting on something, and I think that you're
Vaush.
saying that
That's
it's inherently
not his
racial. I really want to explore that with
name.
you because I think that's interesting. I think you're wrong, but I think that's interesting, where I think the racial thing is actually being used to distract people like you and I from actually talking about what's really happening here, which is a small group of people getting a lot richer while normal people get poor. And I think the racial thing is being used as this distraction tool to throw smokescreen in the middle while we're talking about something that we're never really going to have consensus on, when the true struggle right now is mainly economic.
Yeah, well, I think that applying reparations along racial lines runs into a bunch of really tough issues. Which neighborhoods? Do you go by like blood? Like, can you prove your great-great-grandfather was a slave? It gets very difficult very quickly. Maybe that would be the most direct interpretation of generational reparations. But in my mind, the reason why it's important to recognize the racial issue here is that the nature of class divides in this country is cut into racial policy prior to the Civil Rights Act. The redlining that took place, lines which still remain not in law but in practice, led to very distinct, I mean, sometimes, one side of the highway is nice and the other side of the highway, I mean, it legitimately
Can I
looks
just
like
jump in
a-
real quick?
Uh-huh.
I'm from Chicago. 47th Street was split by race. No joke. This is long-standing effects on the city. Just to point out.
No, and I grew up.
Yeah, there's a lot of we still live in a very segregated society. Obviously, I use that word in terms of racial percentages in certain areas, not because it's deliberate.
Grew up in LA, and on either side of the 5, which cut through the city, I mean, or the 405, sorry.
Let me
right
just
there.
interject something too, and I don't know if you're familiar. We were actually told that we would be arrested from the south side of 47th. If we crossed 47th, we would get arrested because the cops would pull up and say, "You don't live in this neighborhood. What are you doing here?"
I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, so I've heard stories like that. I mean, like,
No,
I'm very clear to say I'm not from Chicago.
I grew up in Beverly Hills, which is close, though, to West Hollywood and Koreatown, and the lines are clear as day. The reason I say that, though, about like the racial project, is that because explicit discrimination is no longer in the law, we've pretty much wiped that out, with the exception of some, I guess, edge cases. The project of systemic racism, or the existence of systemic racism, is something which is carried through class by inertia. It isn't something you can explicitly legislate along anymore. I mean, obviously, nobody's out there passing laws like black people can't do this. That'd be silly. But instead, the consequences of slavery and of second-class citizenship for black people left unaddressed, a wound left to fester that, unfortunately, can't really heal itself inertially unless we do something specific.
So the issue with that argument is that the more that we intervened in the black community, it actually had the opposite effect. And Thomas Sowell probably has done the best research and literature on this. You can laugh all you want. He's got
I wasn't trying to besmirch.
He's a very thoughtful thinker, and he actually lived through this, right? He lived through the Black Renaissance in the 40s and the 50s, where redlining was a legitimate problem. So was yellowlining, by the way, against Italians and against Jews. Nowhere nearly as bad, but there were other degrees of discrimination based on ethnicity and cultural background. And the black community, especially, the area really well in the south of Chicago, right near the Chicago stockyards, the black community almost had this rallying cry where they were being discriminated against everywhere, and they kind of collectivized their purchasing power, and they saw their incomes increase actually at a higher rate than white Americans in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. You've heard this argument many times, and you probably disagree with it, but it's just true, is that the moment that we all of a sudden de-emphasized fathers
That's
being in
so
the
like
home
Tucker
and
Carlson.
subsidized fatherlessness, we saw all these
True.
other trends increase. So right before the Civil Rights Act passed, about 24% of black children were born without a father. Now it's upwards of 70%. You guys can look at the Washington Examiner. It's 77%. Let's say it's 65%. So something has to explain that 40-point increase.
May I?
Yeah, just let me finish.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that America got more racist. It could be the cocaine thing, which is a common issue. It could be, operations of all these things. But a 40-point increase, I would point to a culture of fatherlessness, really bad government-run public schools, and then subsidizing behavior that isn't good.
So there are a few things that I can agree with you on. First of all, having two people in your house to raise you is pretty much essential. You absolutely
Glad we
need to.
agree.
This is undeniable. While I don't believe in shaming single parents, even if their single parentedness is a
I agree
product
with
of
that.
bad decision.
So this is something that I think conservatives misunderstand. At least I don't want to speak for all. One thing that I'm going to stop trying to do is, pretend that I'm able to advocate for all of what liberals or like the left believes. And just so y'all know, when I define myself as a liberal, I know there's like a big divide between liberals and like leftists. I don't mean in that sense. I mean it in kind of like the conservative liberal, the binary thing. And a lot of times I try to defend what all these people on the left say and do. I'll just speak to what I believe. And then if you want to support my views, call it whatever you want. But it's like what the left should be, in my opinion. I completely forgot what I was going to say. I'll remember if I keep playing this 1 second.
Making it's still good. You need it's in this economy, one parent, honestly. Yeah. But
right. Pretending that the left doesn't think, I just did it. Pretending that I don't think, okay, no, I like using the left better. Pretending that the left doesn't think we should have two parents in a home is such a straw man. Of course, I feel like everyone recognizes, of course, you should have two parents. That's the best, most ideal situation. All we say is, for one, if that isn't the case, let me think about this. The biggest thing is the reason why a lot of homes don't have that is not something we just should go, oh, well, looks like it's a cultural thing, and then walk away from it. Well, broad cultural pattern in society can be addressed. So you address that as a society. And the best mechanism for collective action on behalf of the people is the government. And so when we're talking about politics and what we want our politicians to do, and the left is saying, hey, maybe we should try to lift people in poverty out of poverty and because, black people are in poverty at a much higher rate, also address that specifically. And then they go, well, there aren't fathers in the home. Game over. And it's kind of like, yeah, okay, but let's address that. I mean, and he's about to bring this up, important point. Actually, fathers are in the home at a similar rate as white people. The studies that they cite, again, you can look at the methodology, is talking about married parents in the home. And for a number of reasons, a lot of the single parent households that they cite are actually two-parent households, and they're just not married. But at least one of the studies I was looking at, similar involvement in the kid's life and stuff like that. But I definitely think, like, why do they act like the left doesn't believe this? I think it's great if you have two parents, they're married, and they have a kid or a number of kids. That's probably the most healthy environment for a kid to grow up in. Now, I don't think those two parents being two of the same sex is the melting down of the world. And based on the data, kids from those homes do really well. But in a general sense, yeah, married parents in a home, that's great. And if not married, just having two parents in the home is also really good.
With that being said, there has been research shown that the rate of black fatherlessness is somewhat over-exaggerated, in large part because that number only applies to married fathers, so husbands raising their children. It turns out when you account for unmarried black couples taking care of their kids, the numbers actually rise to those just below white couples. I think there was an article on that. I don't know if I remember saw it in Vice, but it tracks back to some really big study that was done back in 2016. So that's one point. But you are right. There are perverse incentives. For example, many welfare stipulations cut off with a shared income, which is only a few $1,000s per year higher than the necessary cutoff for the single income. Meaning that if you're a single mom you can apply for the welfare just fine. But then if you get married or otherwise file jointly,
Exactly.
you go above the cap for welfare. This is a horribly designed program, undeniably, and it incentivizes bad, destructive behavior. The best thing that we can do, we restructure the welfare system in this country. Welfare is good for us. It is. I don't benefit from
I'm
it.
sorry. If any conservatives are watching, if you watch this debate, and we're talking about, this isn't really what they're talking about, but let's say they're talking about poverty in the black community. And Vaush goes into an elaborate explanation about what things in our current system are broken. And one of the examples he cites is the way that you can get qualify for welfare incentivizes not being married based on your circumstances. And like it can in certain situations, and it happens a lot. And we could fix that. And then we could restructure the system in such a way where it's actually beneficial to have that situation be different. And that's his like solution. And then Charlie Kirk's solution, even if you feel like you're on the right, at least admit to this, is like his only thing was, and this is I hear so often, oh my goodness, yeah, it's what I already said. Well, there's just not black fathers in the household. So that's what's causing all the problems. That's why they're in poverty more. Sucks to suck. I mean, okay, so what do you want to do about that? You can't, your advocacy in politics can't be like, we should have you know how there's some cultural issues in America? We should not have them. Like, you have to present how you plan on doing that through the political system. And then also on the more racist side of the spectrum, some people are like, that cultural difference is based on them being black, which is literally you cannot provide a shred of evidence for. And we can definitely solve these issues with political action rather than just standing there and screaming that, oh, well, there's not black fathers in the household. And again, that's talking about married black fathers, but
Nope, I don't think either of you.
How do you have a
benefit from it,
solution?
I'm guessing, but we do collectively downstream from the increased economic potential of people who now have the money to afford daycare, proper childcare, get an education. In the long run, people in this country being richer enriches all of us. It's a mutual project. So we work on that. We find out what works and what doesn't, which welfare programs function, which don't, which types of economic revitalization function and which don't. And I legitimately believe that if we apply this country has the bones to be just a permanent economic beacon on the hill, just like a shiny example to the rest of the world.
I agree with a lot of that. The bigger issue with the racial thing is that when you put some of these factors in, even to present data, it doesn't pan out on racial lines, right? And this is where I think you'll agree, because you just said 2 parents in the home is a good thing, which we totally agree on. I think that's the ideal. Everything shows that is something that we should, push for.
3 parents maybe, get even better.
Oh yeah,
50%.
yeah, polyamorous relationships.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
Based.
But I will say that if you look at the data from the government, that a white child being raised by a single mother is less likely to succeed by 10 independently picked metrics than a black child being raised by a mother and a father. And so maybe it's less about the skin color and more about the removal of parents and specifically fathers in the homes. Now, if you want to talk about a domestic Marshall Plan to go put fathers back in the home regardless of skin color, I will sign up for that in a second.
With the right welfare, the right systems, I think people will tend to their own family.
But
you're
that would
for
then all of a
cutting-
sudden de-emphasize what you said earlier, where it says it needs to be on racial lines, right? I say, no, it needs to be on nuclear family lines.
Well, no, I think that the neighborhood revitalization should just be on
Okay.
like a sort of class assessment. I
First
think-
off, oh my God. Okay. You can help people who don't have the correct situation without incentivizing others to get in the wrong situation. But the easiest way to do that is universal programs. That's why I think as many programs as we can make universal as possible, the better. So that you don't have people, saying, oh, I could lose all my benefits, welfare benefits, if I notch up that next income bracket. Or at least I do think things being on a sliding scale is a better option. So as you make more, your welfare slowly gets less and less rather than these cutoff points. But the funny thing is, Charlie always pretends to be open to ideas, and then if you ask him specifics, he's like, "Oh wait, I forgot. I'm not allowed to want the government to do anything beneficial for people." I'm sorry, that's alienating to any conservatives, but you get the point. Like the small government should do less. So then he kind of goes, never mind. I remember this other debate I was watching. He was like getting on board with taxing the rich in principle, and then once the guy was like, oh, cool. So you're okay with taxing or raising the top marginal tax rate? He was like, oh no, never, no, and then he gave some excuse.
I think that when we recognize this problem, though, there are so many trends when it comes to poverty.
Oh my gosh, the right, this new like conservative populism thing. They rail so much. The billionaires. Oh my gosh, Jeff Bezos. How is it? This is what Charlie says. How is it that Jeff Bezos can have $200 billion and we still have all this homelessness? It's like, oh, cool. So you want to tax him more and help the homeless people? I don't know about that.
That involve the discussion of race, you know? And there are some which do not. There are some types of poverty, some effects that are just ubiquitous and equally felt. But with regards to, say, you know, black people, the fact that they couldn't get loans to purchase homes for a very long time. I mean, there were people living who couldn't do this. The fact that they didn't benefit from the Marshall Plan, if I remember correctly, after World War II.
Well, Marshall Plan was Europe. You're talking about the GI Bill.
Oh, sorry, the GI Bill. My apologies.
Let me just point out all these white guys sitting having a debate over the black community, huh?
I just think that there is a lot of economic inequality. A lot of it's tied to race, but we don't need to turn this into some weird blood quantum issue where we go tracking down every black American and holding
This is one thing, just for anyone who's more to the right than me, who needs me to say something that will bring them into the warm family. I do recognize how annoying it is. That was Tim Pool, but this happens a lot on the left. Oh my God. When people say like, oh, you can't speak to this issue because you're not of that identity. No. I think there's tons of value in listening to people of a certain identity because they will have experiences that you haven't had, personal experiences. But absolutely not. No matter what life circumstances and what identity group you fall into, you can still come to the right opinions by being logical, and then you should absolutely advocate for them. So don't let people silence you by saying that you don't fall into the group that you're talking about.
under a microscope to see whether they
Again, it's great to listen, get insights, but anyone should be able to come to the correct opinion and then advocate for it.
Now, we just need to tend to our own.
This is where I want to. We kind of got off critical race theory very quickly.
I forgot about that.
I want to bring it back.
We're agreeing way too much now.
All right.
No, because this is one of the issues I see. Right, you see these conversations around. I don't know how you describe it because it's a variety of things. Wokeism is typically a catch-all term for some kind of ideology that involves anti-racism, which involves critical race theory, critical race praxis. And you're seeing in schools specific curriculums where they say to kids like, we had a book here. Mm-hmm. We had a book brought to us by one of these parents who's been going to these schools. And it was an anti-racist curriculum workbook where it asked children why they thought that black children felt bad about their skin color. Now, I take issue with those things. They had another book where it was a little girl yelling at her mother saying, "You're lying to me about race." And then there was a whiteness contract with a devil tail coming out of it.
Okay, I saw that one.
Yeah, these are in schools.
Yeah, okay. So that the whiteness devil tail thing, I saw that. That's indefensible. Yeah. I'm not going to stand at that. With regards to that, why do you think black...
I'll just say this now, and then they'll get into it, and I'll probably just watch it and try to talk less in this topic. But I want to give this because it's important. There are definitely critical race theory inspired stuff that anecdotally has been cited in schools that are no way. And I'm totally okay with people advocating against that. Here's my issue, and this is why I spend more time going the right has no point about this whole critical race theory thing instead of talking more about what I'm about to say. The reason is the right isn't saying we want to make sure that in our schools they don't provide books that whatever that was, a white person with a devil tail, like everyone should be on board with saying that should not be in schools. Or even there's been some real cringy stories about teachers lining people up in the level of historical oppression. Kids, terrible. Of course, everyone recognizes that, or not everyone. Lots of people recognize that, and I would even be okay if we saw laws passed, banning certain levels of extreme discussions about race in those terms. Like, hey, let's all go around and white people need to explain why they are guilty. Things like that have come out, anecdotes. Again, maybe some of it's unverified, but that's definitely like the conversation that the right gets their inspiration from. I believe that's very, very limited. And just like how I can cite a bunch of stories in schools of teachers teaching some like wacko stuff, I'm not going to make a whole movement about it. For example, on like the other end of the racist spectrum, a story came out about, oh my God, I don't even like, it was kids were doing a slave auction with like, and it was racialized. It wasn't just everyone's, like, it was, you know, the white kids were buying the black kids, like terrible stuff like that. And then you see teachers in certain Southern schools, curricula came out about, like that was shown, just some deeply historically inaccurate teachings that were pushing very racist in like right-wing speak stuff. But I'm not going around like thinking there's this big epidemic. I think in those individual communities, if you see that, root it out. On either end, if you think it's too far left racial stuff or too far right racial stuff. But the issue is, that's not what they're trying to ban in schools. They're trying to ban basic teaching on history of racism in America and the details of slavery in certain instances and the teaching of, I mean, before we know it, it's going to be MLK they don't want us to learn about. And they're saying you have to take a neutral stance on all these events. And the language of these bills is making it to where it would be nearly impossible for teachers to even address race in any way. And that is a very real thing that needs to be discussed, just not in wacko, weird devil tales on white people. That's just crazy. That's horrible. And so if they were just trying to get rid of that, I would be down for it. But that's not what they're doing. It's kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, which is such a weird, why do we say that? Imagine you like pour a bucket of your, wait, how would you even do that? Anyways, that's a weird thing. But it is that, that's what we're doing is, oh, some people went too far talking about race. So instead of making sure people don't go far talking about race, let's just not talk about race at all. And to those who are like, yeah, that sounds like an amazing world, let's just not talk about race at all because I'm colorblind and I don't see color. You can't fix a problem if you're not aware of it. And there's still a problem. And even so, if there wasn't, which there is, but if there wasn't, just learning our history, you have to talk about those elements. I mean, we're not even 50 years out from, or maybe a little bit more, but we're one person's lifetime away from racism being written into law. And so you can't teach American history without teaching about it. It's not saying that we're a racist country deeply. Well, okay, there are racist systems, so that in that sense, but that we're terrible, and it's not teaching kids to hate one another for the color of their skin. And you can teach race without teaching those things. Of course, it's so simple. But they're trying to get rid of it all. And then we're going to have a bunch of people who are ignorant to these facts and won't be able to help be a part of the solution.
Black folk feel bad about the skin.
And I'll be careful because I don't have the book in front of me. It was something to this effect. It was a bunch of questions where it would ask you things like that and then ask you to answer. You know, what have you done to make someone based on their skin color behave or whatever, and things of that nature.
I think these are conversations that are worth having. I wonder, with regards to what you're saying, do you know what grade level these were at?
I think she mentioned the woman, it was Asra.
Yeah, Azra.
I think 4th grade.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But I got to be honest, like the anti-racist one didn't have any pictures or anything. It was just questions. And I think she mentioned it was in a 3rd grade. The what was it called? What was the book called about the whiteness contract? The one you said was indefensible. That one was like a little girl who looked to be about like 8 years old. So
Yeah, I saw that online.
Can I ask a question? So let's go to this piece,
Yeah, sure.
issue
Go
by
for it.
issue. Ibram X. Kendi, who's kind of one of the, archangels of the wokeism movement.
Beloved figure in the minds of conservatives and liberals alike.
So Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm paraphrasing, and you guys could pick up the quote, is that we need discrimination today because there was discrimination yesterday. That's the essence of the quote, right, Tim?
yeah, he said the only solution for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only solution for present discrimination is future discrimination.
So I find that to be reprehensible. What say you?
I think it's misguided in large part because I don't believe if there was some god who could just distribute all resources in a perfectly ordained way and did so at the snap of a finger, then maybe that would be a decent argument. In the real world, we have to go through politics, and any kind of discriminatory treatment under any circumstances, no matter how well intentioned, is going to have adverse effects. So, with regard to what he said, there is a very charitable interpretation, and that charitable interpretation is discriminatory practices in the past necessitate favorable practices today, a way of bringing people up. My reparations argument, I mean, the poor in this country have always had it bad, at least worse than they could otherwise. That is essentially a version of that argument. Preferable treatment towards the poor. We do this with welfare because there are systemic barriers keeping them from full participation. Along racial lines, I don't even know what that would look like. I don't even know how that would look good. I'm not a big fan of
He
affirmative
wrote an
action.
amendment, right, called the Anti-Racist Amendment to the Constitution. It's not being considered anytime soon, where it would be preference.
So you'll say Biden will get it.
Yeah, based on skin color, that there would be some sort of accommodation based just by the melanin content in your skin.
There is one thing I want to say, though, and this is common in upper academia, and I know Ibram sometimes gets brought into non-academic discussions, which I don't consider myself an academic, so I'm including myself in that. But sometimes I think these are fun to discuss, these ideas. What I noticed, at least in some of the classes that I took, the higher-end classes, was that sometimes when you were presented ideas, they were presented not to have you agree with them, but rather to incentivize the greatest discussion. For example, I wasn't an economist, but I did learn about Karl Marx. Now, not many professors are actual Marxists, unfortunately. So when Marx was brought up in that context, it wasn't like, here's what you need to know, here's what you should believe. It was more, here are some ideas, radical and agreeable. What do you think about them? And when I look at what Kendi has written, I don't often agree with some of the more radical propositions, but I do enjoy the process. And I don't think that's something which should warrant the state intervening to cut out those discussions. I think that's a
great
brutish response.
That's a great segue, if I could go. So the next question then is, should we be teaching 1st and 2nd and 3rd graders to be hyper-conscious aware of race all the time? I think that's destructive. I think it goes against the American promise of e pluribus unum, of caring more about character than skin color. And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a mixed bag when it came to this stuff.
He's a cool guy.
But he was a very radical socialist in some regard, but he really hit it perfectly when he said that this was the ideal of the American system.
At least Charlie admits that. A lot of conservatives love citing Martin Luther King, and then whenever you give back to them any more progressive, how do I say, more progressive stances that he had that weren't related to like his "I have a dream" speech, because that's like all they know, they're less comfortable. So at least he admits that he really was a far left person.
Do you see any downsides to getting 3-year-olds just caring,
Economically too.
not 3-year-olds, 3rd graders caring about the color of people's skin all the time?
Well, I think depending on their environment, they might already, whether they know it or not, in very implicit and subtle ways. We know from tests done, for example, on like little kids, like 4-year-olds or whatever, that some elements of implicit racial bias already infect their thinking. Now, that isn't a moral judgment. We're all flawed beings. We live and we die. We all have biases. That is just a part of life. But I think conversations about those things can be valuable. I don't believe we live in a colorblind world, so teaching people that we do can often lead them to remain ignorant to evident problems. Now, to what extent would you be comfortable, what would you say, like bringing a racial consciousness to 3rd graders?
For me, very little to none. As don't care about it, de-emphasize it, look at the spirit, the soul, the conduct, and the character of the human being. Their skin color means nothing.
This one is a good battleground for conservatives to fight on, because you're able to say stuff like that sounds nice, like it sounds so nice. I want to be the one that gets to say, I believe that we should just focus on the soul and the character of the person. And that's true. That is where we need to get. 100%. Let me give you an example. Okay, ready? You're running and you fall. And your knee gets broken. Your knee gets hurt, we'll say. And so you go to the doctor and you say, my knee hurts and I can't walk on it. And they go, interesting. which response would you want them to have? Number one, they say, listen, I believe that all people should be able to walk without hindrance. So go ye on. Don't know if that's the correct use of ye. And walk, my person. Or would you like them to go, I believe that all people should be able to walk without hindrance. And because of that, I want to help fix your knee. So first, let me learn about your knee. Let me know what happened. We are going to do some tests on your knee. And I'm going to learn about the issue first. And then I'm going to give you some sort of surgery or whatever's necessary. I'm going to repair, one might call it reparations of your knee. And then you will be prepared to do what I believe all people should be able to do, which is walk without hindrance. I would want the second option. It doesn't help me if he just tells me, hey, funny enough, I think you should be able to walk without your knee hurting. And I would say same, but it hurts. Okay. Do I have to explain the analogy? I think you get it. I'll explain it anyways. So that's very parallel in my mind to right here. He gets to sound so nice and glossy and pretty and moral by saying, listen, I just believe that we shouldn't be teaching our kids to look at race because race doesn't matter. What matters, ladies and gentlemen, is the content, as MLK himself said, of a person's character and not their skin color. Their soul is what matters to me. Are you with me? Right? That sounds so much nicer. But what MLK was even saying, by the way, was, I want to live in a world where people are judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. He didn't say we live in a world where that happens. And so right now we have a hurt knee. We still have racialized problems in our society. So not learning about them, and you don't have to be uber aware all the time where every single child needs to be thinking, I'm white, and blah, blah, blah. Of course not. I grew up being taught about these issues, and I wasn't, I suck for being white. I never thought that, okay? I was like, dang, people in the past did some bad stuff. And I feel a little bad right now because I'm a part of the generation that still hasn't done enough, or part of the current population of this country that hasn't fixed the problems. Like, let's go. But it was exciting. Let's fix these issues. And so that's what is missing in his little cutesy statement there is, yes, we should judge people based on just their actions and their character and all those things, not their race. But because of the issues we have in society, to be able to fix them, we have to learn about them, and there are racial ones. And so to fix those, we've got to learn about them. And then once we fix them, it's going to be an amazing time because everyone will just judge each other based on their character. I'm sorry, that was so long. What just happened? Okay, there we go.
Not saying that you should start to emphasize, organize what people look like, because therefore it means something that we're going to tell you. A great example is that this is the textbook definition of stereotyping, right? Is that if you see a black person, you don't know their history. Mm-hmm. You don't know if they're the son of a Nigerian billionaire. You don't know if they're an immigrant from Turks and Caicos. And you don't know if they're the 9th generation descendant of slaves, right? There's been 2 million blacks that have come to America legally through the immigration process since 1980.
Have there been 9 generations?
So this sort of hyper-fixation on race, and I want to keep on getting back to this because I'm just curious, is do you think this is actually helpful when there actually might be stuff that 90% of the country agrees on? Do you think this actually might be a smokescreen tactic?
Well, it really depends on what's being taught. So here are some things I obviously don't want taught. One group is better than another, of course. Black people are like this.
But the concept of one group being the teaching of the belief that one group is greater than another is necessary because, of course, we should not teach people that one race is better than another. But to teach about like racism and white supremacy, you have to teach about that some people believe that. And that's in the language of these bills. They said the concept or something like that of one race being greater than another can't be taught. Okay, so we can't teach about that concept because we have to teach people that that's a belief to have them understand what some of these issues were caused by.
People are like this.
That is
This
being
isn't-
taught in some schools.
There
just
are
so we're
some
clear.
schools that do that, and while I would look to see their curriculum mended, I don't. Again, I just don't want to implicitly agree with like a state ban. I would see adjustments done. But there are some things that I think could be done well. For example, say you're teaching about very basic early history. You know,
This is where I wanted to get to.
yeah,
this
okay.
is important.
So here are some things about America's founding that I like. One of the first practical liberal democracies, glory of the republic. Folks had nice hair back then.
Not a
I'm-
democracy, but a republic.
Right.
That's
Well,
okay.
I mean, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, and we of course did more to fulfill the promise of a democracy with time. But obviously, when America was founded, it was a slave state. 1 in every 6 people in America at that time was human property.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How many states had abolished slavery by the time the Constitution was
Why are you
ratified?
smiling like that?
Well, I don't know the exact number.
9 out of
But I mean,
13.
Yeah, nine. Okay. That hurt. Okay. Ow. What did he just say? He said 1 out of every 6 people in our country was a slave. And your response is, well, guess what? 9 out of the 12 states had already abolished it. Yeah, because they weren't relying on that labor, but the states that were needing that labor were still doing it. And our government, our federal government, oversaw that and was okay with it. And I hate... Okay, yeah, blah, blah.
Gene, that's not a slave country.
well, then you could say it was a confederacy with portions that were slave
I think
states.
that's better said. 9 out of 13 had already abolished. There was a sunset moratorium for slavery in the Constitution.
So this could.
Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. We were on the way to eradication. We were not a slave country.
Well, hold on. I mean,
And I'll add one thing.
we were on the way, but then like 80 years later, it was still happening.
so the question is why, right? That's a really important question.
Economics, I
well,
imagine.
yeah, so Cotton Gin and John C. Calhoun. Happy
hold
to
on.
go through that. But yeah,
There was actually a grievance in the Declaration of Independence, specifically that the Crown had enslaved people.
first draft.
Yeah, in the first draft from Thomas Jefferson, the Crown had enslaved people who had done nothing to offend the Crown, brought them to the states, and then were then offering them the freedom that was stolen from them to wage war against the colonists who had grievances.
It's an
Now,
effective strategy. The
it
Union
is,
did it
but
too.
he-
They promised the slaves
Right.
when they moved southward. Yeah.
Jefferson took that out. And he did it because they felt, at least this is according to historians, that without, I think it was South Carolina and Georgia, they would not have been able to win the revolution.
Okay, here's something that I want to say that maybe conservatives will agree with. I am totally on board with being able to set aside, when talking about the merits of the ideas of our founders, we don't always have to say, well, it doesn't matter because they had slaves. Like, I get that you can absolutely look at an individual and say, this founder, wow, George Washington, so many great ideas that helped lead to one of the most prominent and democratic spreading as far as like influencing the world. I don't mean in the bad ways like saying we're spreading democracy and invading countries, but we did have a ripple effect with the success of our democracy, other countries following suit. And our founders helped develop that. And that's amazing. And we should absolutely analyze their ideas and be in awe of them. And then also recognize the terrible stuff, but not, you can think about two things. But I guess my point to conservatives is I see some people on the left saying, okay, now let's, I don't care about everything they said because they had slaves. And I totally get like, okay, we can look at both.
Revolutionary War, and so they had to remove that,
That's exactly
hoping
right.
they would stay in. Now, the reality is, I'll just say one more point. They thought they were going to lose anyway. They really did. They didn't think they could go up against the greatest empire in the world at the time. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think. An important factor here is that I believe it was the British Empire, actually 1833 had abolished slavery in all of its territories, and it took the U.S. a little bit longer to do so. But I want to make sure I stress, this issue for the start of the country was contentious and ultimately led to violence because from the beginning, as Charlie pointed out, most of the states had already abolished this. So it was like people were ready to fight from the beginning.
I just want to say to that, my understanding of the founding of America isn't as simplistic as the founding fathers were evil because X or Y. I recognize, of course, that
And I appreciate that.
there are incredible complexities to those issues. And also, I'm not a historian. There are probably tons of things out there I don't even know.
But also, can we just let go of even caring or establishing if an individual and I mean this in the political sense, is good or evil or even good, a good person or a bad person. Why does that even matter? Like, I don't need to know if Bernie's a good person, if he's like good or evil. I just need to know what he is advocating for and then analyze the likelihood that he'll be able to fight to get it implemented, and then hold him responsible for when he falls short. And same thing with Biden, and same thing with anybody else. We get so obsessed. It's the same thing we do with celebrities. Like, oh my God, they're amazing, they're amazing. And then you find they're not. It's like, ugh. Why do we even care if the founders were like moral or not? Or not moral or not, that's important. But I'm saying, like, if they, as an individual, are like this good person. It doesn't matter. Let's just talk about each one of the things. Okay, that was really good. Happy that happened. They helped to do that. Awesome. But the over glorification of individuals is so annoying.
That might change my opinion in the future.
Like, as a politician, you are just a tool that we use as people to enact certain change or help run society. You're just serving us as a politician. So stop, like, celebritizing. But they are a celebrity because, you know, they're famous. But I'm saying, like, stop making people your heroes, I guess.
But with that being said, while I recognize there were fine-bodied, hearted, and souled Americans who recognized slavery was a moral aberration from the get-go, 1 in every 6 Americans was owned. And while that may have been constrained to some of the states, it was still ultimately under the purview of the federal government to make decisions with regards to the legality and constitutionality of that. Now, some people, they get really defensive when this conversation comes. I'm not saying you guys, but some people, they do. And I think it's because they think I'm assigning some kind of moral worth to them now, or to the country now, or making some kind of broad prescriptive statement. I'm not. The only thing I'm saying is, when you're teaching history to a bunch of kids, you know, you have to teach it all. At least you have to teach the basic pointers. And for Black Americans, the history of this country has been less than favorable. So I think that in the context of that discussion, saying, and to this day, we still have some problems with race. There are some legacies of slavery that still affect Black people, and we're working on it today. Something like that. That's a kind of racialization that I'm in favor of, because it doesn't encourage stereotyping, it doesn't encourage discrimination, it just encourages a base awareness of some serious problems.
So, but that's not happening, right? Is that largely what we're seeing through school districts like Chicago?
No. Shut up. Okay. Everyone, we're going to do a little mid-debate break. We're almost to the hour mark, and I think sometime towards the end, I don't know, we're going to do a little breathing exercise. Okay, the exercise is over. Largely what you're seeing in things that go viral on Twitter for being so outrageous. Most schools, I would venture to say, probably teach what Vaush just outlined. Hey, here's the facts of history. Some things are still affecting us today. We should all do our absolute best to overcome any biases that we have and ameliorate any remaining issues we have in our society. Class dismissed.
And in Washington, D.C., and the entire California school system, representing
Jared,
10,000 schools and 6 million students.
I've seen the documents on this.
Oh.
Yeah, is that it doesn't have that kind of nuance and complexity that you just presented, right? Where let me just say this, is that part of the kind of archangel triumphant of the wokeism coalition is Nicole Hannah-Jones, Robin DiAngelo, and Ibram X. Kendi. And Nicole Hannah-Jones in particular, right, the author of the 1619 Project, she heretically says that America was founded on slavery, right? And so
I'd be okay with that.
But it's just not true.
It depends on what you mean by founded on.
She defines this. She says the founding fathers were in favor of it. Not true. George Washington wasn't. John Adams wasn't. John Quincy Adams wasn't. Thomas Jefferson.
If he means they weren't in favor of it, like, didn't think it was the best thing for a country to do, okay, but I mean, George Washington had slaves, so again, I think what Vaush is trying to say too is, like, I mean, it depends on what you mean by founded on slavery. Like, founded on top of an economy that was reliant on free labor through the means of owning people who fell into a racial group. Yeah, we found on slavery, but like, what would the other interpretation be? a central part of our entire, like, our country's Afghan. Wait, what are they called? Our country's tapestry was woven with only. But again, yeah, we there was a lot of slavery woven in there. So, what's the other interpretation?
Jefferson even signed a moratorium on new slaves coming into the United States. Ben Franklin chaired an anti-slavery convention in 1775. None of these guys were writing expositionally how wonderful slavery
Well,
was.
this isn't being taught to third graders, right? The 1619 Project's a little New York op-ed.
No, it's
part of
not.
the-
See, that's where you're wrong. The 1619 project's being implemented as school district curriculum in thousands of school districts across the country.
That's
seen-
true.
well,
Across the
It's
country.
not just like a podcast. This is curriculum.
Right, there are principles of the 1619 Project that I think are defensible. First of all, we as Americans tend to think of the founding of our country as its legal founding, you know? But the legal founding of the United States didn't really mean much for a slave. I mean, it really didn't matter that much for the peasantry of the time, no matter what.
See, that's where I disagree. So when was the first state to abolish slavery? Vermont in 1777. Why?
Well, I mean, for the
because they were
slaves who lived
inspired
in-
by the Declaration of Independence. Things started to change in that year.
Right, but
Don't do it, Luke. Focus on the topics, not the person.
the slaves that then continued to be slaves would have been in the states that didn't make that choice, right?
Which
I mean,
were
they would have
largely
been-
in southern states.
Yeah. Well, that's
I do realize now, I watch other people and I'm like, stop making shallow insults about people, like critiquing their personality or their look or something. Like, it's so easy not to do that. But now I see, especially when you get riled up, you kind of want to, like Charlie Kirk's little fake sincere thing. Maybe it's genuine. I will say, since I've been going after him a lot, Charlie Kirk, I will say, he goes out of his way to debate actual properly armed liberals and people on the left. And that is respectable. Like, if you're kind of, you're grifting and you're kind of like, I'm just going to keep peddling these talking points and not confident in my views, which he could still be peddling talking points and still not believe in what he believes in, all those things. But regardless, I just want to say I have this much respect for anyone who's willing to constantly go out and debate people who are actually good debaters. Not the Steven Crowder thing of I'm going to go to colleges and find some uneducated liberal who will get a funny, we can get a funny clip from. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Charlie Kirk has like a debate night where he's brought on really good debaters and had to, have his views challenged, and I respect that.
That's what I mean. I didn't mean to miss out on the particulars there. The only point that I'm making is that depending on whose lineage you follow, depending on the narrative that you tell, this is a very postmodern idea. And I would like to consider myself charitable to postmodernism, the idea that there are many ways you can describe the human experience, which I think we all believe to some extent. Depending on who you follow, you get very different ideas on what America is, when America was founded, not in a legal sense, but in a conceptual sense, and who today holds the birthrights to which they were entitled. And these conversations should be had. They're worthwhile conversations to have. I've seen some of the curriculums in these schools. I find some of them a little bit objectionable. But to be perfectly clear, I found school curriculums objectionable for ages. About half of Americans believe in the lost cause myth, the idea that the North started the Civil War and it was over like states' rights or whatever. That's believed by a large number of Americans. There are textbooks put out by Pearson in Texas that have
There is
narratives
some
in them
truth
that
to
are-
that, by the way,
There's-
just so we're clear.
It is.
That was one of the things I was trying to cite earlier about we can find extreme examples, but it doesn't mean that we need to have a whole movement to ban the entire topic. And that was one of them. There are still schools teaching that slavery wasn't the main, or wasn't, there was one thing I saw that it was more, that's what it was. It was more about states' rights and economics than slavery. And it's like, yeah, but what was the economic thing that they were fighting for? What was the right as a state they were fighting for?
I'm happy to go through Civil War history.
Well, let me-
on
let
that,
me-
but yeah.
I just want to say, I have long had problems with many of the ways children are taught concepts in this country.
That's fair.
None of them have made me want to get my state legislators to just outright ban all of these ideas.
Well, so let me I'll make 2 points. First, the 1619 Project is in schools. Newsweek reports U.S. schools have openly taught the 1619 Project for months. This is back in September. We've got Education Next. The 1619 Project enters classrooms. We have the Pulitzer Center, the 1619 Project curriculum. Here you will find resources for teaching 1619 in your schools. And I don't know if I have one more source. Right. Then we move to the.
Do they read the full thing in class? That's crazy. It's pretty dense reading, you know.
They do it.
And then lawmakers push to ban 1619 from schools. So it's there. It is.
And so let me tell you why people like myself are pushing for the bans of the 1619 project. Is that first of all, it's just not true. It is not even charitably, in the most charitable reading, to use a word that you used, even remotely fair to the ethos or the founding of the country. It doesn't go to original source documents. It doesn't go to quotations, and it meanders through generalizations and very heavy emphasis on emotion.
Can I ask something though? Really
Sure,
quick?
go ahead.
Is this not being presented as an alternate perspective, as opposed to replacing the entirety of our curriculum?
No, it is, and this is an important thing, which is what is education, right? So is education where we're supposed to, for 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th graders, open up every single bad idea that's ever been discovered and have kids choose, or are we trying to lead them towards something? Lead them towards having better developed character? Lead them towards trying to find objective truth?
Moral. We want to make them moral.
I agree. And so the question is, what is good? What is evil? Well, we don't know a line is crooked unless we have a straight line to compare it to.
Well, you know what I think on this, don't you?
I actually don't.
The narrative we've told about the founding of this country has for a long time been deeply whitewashed. We talk about the founding fathers like they're heroes, and there is heroism in their lives, no denying that. And we often gloss over many of the horrors of this country. There are things that we've done, for example, that we would use as an incentive to forever despise other countries that nobody's even taught about. Like one I read recently, for example, was that we did mass chemical bathings, and I believe it was sterilizations of Hispanic people at the beginning of the 20th century moving up past the southern border, because there were like these militias forming in towns near the border. And they just did it because they had the de facto support of the local government as a way of discouraging their movement up. Now, the numbers involved in that are significant. And I feel like, well, that's maybe not great for 4th graders. There could be more work done to talk about the faults with this country, in addition to eulogizing its
Well, the question is,
largely
what's
white
the
leaders.
goal, though, right? Is the goal to try to have young people graduate by the time of high school, to be skeptical, apprehensive, and not very proud of the country, or eventually tell a true and patriotic story where you have people graduating that are thankful and have gratitude?
Oh,
That's the purpose of education when it comes through.
Gratitude is not the purpose of education.
What?
I think gratitude's a moral necessity.
No, you should be grateful for the people in your
Guys. He just said the purpose. Ooh. The purpose of education is to have people graduate and what did he say? Grateful for your country? Or grateful? Yeah. Huh. How about we just teach the truth, and then however they come out is but again, kind of what he's about to say about activism, and just saying, I don't have this whole thing memorized. This point, just I remember, I completely forgot about the purpose of education. How did I miss that? The purpose of education thing. That's so funny. No, we need to teach people the truth, and then they will be inspired to want to make the country better. And I'm gonna do a video on this. I'm similar to my letter to Republicans video. It's gonna be more of like a edit, reading an essay video. But the title of it, I'm thinking, will be I don't know. I'll decide. But something about loving America, okay? Like, what is loving America, or what does it mean to love America, or something like that. And yeah, he said the point of education should be, this is Sam talking, should be to make people grateful. Wow. And the whole concept of the video is going to be me kind of saying, why is it that we accept, I don't know if I'll say it in these terms, but why is it that we accept the right's characterization that they're the America loving side and we're like the America hating side? Maybe we don't accept the hating, but why is that something that's so common? Yeah, conservatives are the patriotic ones, and then, the left kind of wants to make a bunch of changes. What is more patriotic than wanting to improve the country that you live in? I don't understand that this is a thing that everyone gets away with talking about. It is so unpatriotic to me to be like, oh no, I don't want to make people's lives better in this country. I think loving America means that you want to make it the best that it can be. I've compared this before, but like, if you have a kid, is it more loving to do what you can to make them the best person that they can be? Or Oh, I don't want to. They came out the womb. I don't want to change anything about them. I'm so I love them so much that I don't want to change a thing about them, so they can live whatever horrible life with any character they're like. No, of course not. You want to make sure that your child grows up to be a good person. Same thing with the country. By the way that you can love the country is by actively trying to improve it. Activism. That's loving. That's actually work. Oh, it's like people who mistake love in relationships for just thinking. Like, just, it's all happens here. Oh, I tell my significant other I love them, so I love them. What's their issue? Why are they mad? Love is as much an action as it is a feeling or an emotion or a thought. And so to actually love the country, you need to take action. And that to me is way more patriotic, wanting to improve it, recognizing the issues with it, historical wrongs, and wanting to make those better and make those right and then make improvements. That is patriotic.
Life, but I will never be grateful to the state. I'm not that much of a
Well,
collectivist.
not a state. Are you not thankful that you live in America?
I'm thankful of the things that make my life easier. I was born white to well-off parents, and today I enjoy many of the benefits of having really responsible and
Are
attentive
you
parents.
thankful you have constitutional rights that are protected by government, given
True.
to you by God?
But do you know how
Yeah.
those constitutional rights came about?
Oh.
They were fought
They
for
were-
by whiny bitches like me who were never satisfied with what they were already
They were
given.
granted by God, protected in the Constitution
They were
of
fought for
1787.
by whiny, same as the 14th
Wait,
and 15th Amendments,
what?
everything that's come since. We fought for.
Did he say they were given by God? Okay. Listen, I think God's cool. Like, yay for God. I don't think God put those in the Constitution. I think you should be grateful for the constitutional protections you have. But as Vaush is saying, what was America? America was a bunch of people who were not happy with the wrong things in their current country, and so they started a nation. So they started a new one, and they were as whiny as it gets. So yeah. Oh, guys.
For them, and it is discontentedness
Are you
that
thankful
leads
for
us
those
to fight.
people then?
I'm thankful for their efforts, as am I. For
There's some gratitude.
Sure, I'm grateful to them, but patriotism. I'm grateful to what people in America do. But America's a concept. It's been used to do a lot of good and a lot of harm.
It's a home.
Well, a home can be, I mean, in the broadest sense, but I know what my home is. I know where my family lives, and I'm loyal to them. When it comes to this country, though, this is a political and economic bloc, and I have only one concern, and it's that the people in this.
America. I can't. America's a concept. No, America's a home. A home is a concept. Unless you mean like the structure of a house, like it being a home, like, you know, Austin is my home. That's like, okay, well, what? Charlie has got some zingers coming at us. No, it's a home. That's like from a Disney movie.
This country live the best lives possible. Also outside the country, but I live here. This is my.
It is
my
a home.
backyard.
I mean, yeah,
and
a home.
When
but-
I want people graduating, from high school, I don't want them to feel this sense of contentedness. Contentedness is the death of activism for all that's good. And activists have always been. You're an activist in your own way, as am I. Have always been the forerunners for good.
They've done a lot of damage too.
Sure, they have, but we make the world move. And I want to get kids interested in the flaws in this country because that teaches them to grow up and care about them so hard they fix them.
This is a great piece of disagreement. We have clarity, not agreement, which is obviously what we want, where I think that we should try to be developing and graduating kids with strong character that want to appreciate and protect a country and to try to be active against forces that wish to deconstruct it. Your goal, and we're just not going to persuade each other, is that you want to try to graduate activists that know the flaws and are willing to mobilize to try to fix them or to undo whatever system might be effectuating.
That end part is... No, actually, all of that was really, really fair. The way that he just characterized that. I want to protect what we have. You want to... Good job, Charlie. And you want to graduate activists who want to recognize the issues that we have and either fix them or the ending, I think he, is saying, or deconstruct any systems that oppress you or something. Okay, that's fair. Do you want to be part of the movement that wants to keep everything as is, or the movement that wants to keep the good parts as they are and then recognize the bad parts and fix them? That was a little too left friendly, but you get the point.
Is that fair?
As long as it's responsible and effective, yeah. There are ways to do progressive. Of course, I'm a progressive, so I'll say it's good by default, but there are ways to do it poorly. I disagree with people on the left constantly, either over issues of actual concept or issues of optics or issues of engagement. I always find something to disagree with people on. It's very fun living. But with all that being said, I have to wonder, is it not the prerogative, and I'm not assigning this to you, of tyrants to make sure that the children who graduate from their schools find no fault in the nations they're taught to love?
See, I never said no fault, but you could be thankful for something.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, hate to stop it on that frame, but that is such a good point. The more authoritarian a government gets, think about it. Think about any country. One of the big characteristics that you see in their education systems is hardcore push and nationalist kind of teachings. Every countries that conservatives are like, the first thing an authoritarian government wants to do is make sure that everyone in its citizenry, as they grow up and become adults who have some level of political power, believe there's no issues that need to be fixed, and they should just sit there and be grateful for their country. I think you should be grateful for your country. And like for America, there's so many good things about America that you should be grateful for those things and then want to make it better. Because just most of the things that you're grateful for about America came from people in the past who saw issues and fixed them. I mean, even think about like on a little bit less of like this general scale, like The Weeknd. I'm sure most people like The Weeknd, right? Take it for granted a little, maybe. That wasn't a thing until progressive activists fought for it. And maybe that's a little oversimplified, but the kind of union labor movement, which is definitely a left, at least economically, movement. And so it takes people who are, sure, yes, be grateful for the good things about the country that you're in. And in our case, be grateful about the good things about America. Yeah, awesome. And almost more importantly, let's make it better. Because the things that we're grateful for is because other people made it better. So we got to continue that forward.
And you can have a holistic view of something and understand that there were stumbles and there were missteps while also being pretty freaking proud of that something. How exceptional this project is.
What if there are current problems, like today,
We should talk about those. Like we already talked about fatherlessness, government overreach. Tim, you want to interject?
Oh, no, I think it's interesting to me. You're from the suburbs of Chicago. You grew up in Beverly Hills. Mm-hmm. Somebody commented, I think it was on Twitter, they said that when they went to school, they weren't taught about Black Wall Street or the Tulsa bombings and things like that. And that's proof, or that shows that our schools are not teaching. And I was like, I was taught all those things. In Chicago. We were taught about the Trail of Tears. We were taught about westward expansion. We were taught about the violation of treaties.
So many people haven't been taught about the Trail of Tears sufficiently.
I was taught a lot as well.
Yeah, we were taught a lot about that.
When we learn history, what we're really learning is a story. I think it's called historiography. Obviously, when we're just looking at the facts of history, I mean, what is it, data and sheets, wrote transcriptions of things people have said. Nobody teaches that. You teach the story. And the story we've told for a long time has bowled over a lot of problems I think we should work to fix. Do we want people to be thankful? Sure. I don't want to.
So we agree on that. Good.
I don't want to stop teaching kids that there are undeniable things they should be happy for. For example, every day that I worked before I was a YouTuber, I thanked union activists back during the turn of the 20th century who gave us the 5-day work week, the 40-hour work week, who ensured that we had proper standards for lunch breaks and what have you in this. And they fought and they were whiny, and I'm sure a lot of them had really bad ideas besides the worker activism. But we all benefited from that.
Do you ever think that as an activist, as a progressive, a libertarian socialist, is there ever a point where the activism actually does much more harm than good and the preservation of what already exists?
Jonathan says, I live in Oklahoma and went to a good school. They didn't teach us any of that. Wow. There we go.
actually should be desirable?
I would say that's the case with black separatists. There are some people in this country, not all of them are black, of course, but who believe that the racial problems between white and black Americans are irreparable, and that the best solution would be for black Americans to leave, or at the very least to form separate enclaves within this
And that's
country.
nothing new, just so you know.
I don't think
no,
that's
it's very old.
I think that's. I don't think that's what Charlie asked. He asked you if there. Do you want to rephrase?
Yeah,
it?
so...
Oh, sorry if I misunderstood.
Well, you were in the general area, but I guess the question is a heavy emphasis on activism for activism's sake, mobilizing for grievances. What if actually what we have as a
You see what he did there? An emphasis on activism for activism's sake. That's not what... If somehow we lived in a country that had no issues, then no, we shouldn't be raising activists. But that's never going to be the case because societies are never perfect. But especially in our current one, there's plenty of real issues. The reason we want to raise people who have like an activist mindset or want to do positive change is because there are real issues, not because activists for activism's sake.
Institutional order is actually
We're never going to get to this video.
Let me ask. Do you think there are things worth that systems in place in the United States that are worth defending?
That's a better way to word it.
Yes.
I just went on a 20 plus hour drive total to get back from LA. And I was really I was like, I need really long video. I was looking for anything that was like 3 hours plus, debates or live streams or something. And so I guess that's if anyone's going on a long drive, this is your live stream to watch.
Yes. Do you believe that there are systems in place in the United States that we should defend and preserve?
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously.
mean, there are ideas. For example, the concept of democracy, the concept of fair representation, the idea that anybody could have a chance if they make it here. These are ideas that I think are almost sacrosanct. I mean, I think they're almost existentially worthwhile. Now, to what extent does this country live up to those promises? In some ways, it does so better than most other countries. Sometimes any other country. In other ways, it could do better. Income mobility here, which is the measure for how effectively this country manages its meritocratic systems, is higher in some European countries than it is here. The idea remains valuable to me, but I can't help but think maybe we could make it better. If making it better entails some highly destructive process that involves tearing down everything we've ever known and such, then eventually you have to do a risk-reward benefit, right?
So what I'm trying to caution you about is that the people pushing CRT or wokeism, they don't have the same sort of nuance that you do. These are revolutionaries that want to tear down the system.
But I am as well. I just think that everything has its time.
You just had kind of a little bit more of a moderated answer.
But how often do actual critical race theorists come on all of the talk show circuits that end up... we've had some. Joy Reid advocated for it, but the actual scholars...
They're running Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. They're running the United States military. They're running they're assigning these ideas. Again, wokeism. Let's use that.
Ooh-wee. Critical race theorists are running Lockheed Martin. Okay, Charlie, and the military. I'm sure what he's referring to is like that one diversity presentation they have to watch a year.
No, with Robin DiAngelo and the federal
white fragility.
Right. I'm not a big fan of her, largely because I think her language incites a lot of negative discourse. I think that it's bad for publication. Maybe good in an academic
So not
setting.
good to teach generals that.
For some random people at a business? Absolutely not. No.
Generals in the military.
Oh, yeah, sure, no.
Because that's what's happening.
Well, the big problem that I have, but keep in mind, that's not wokists running these things. What happens is this, and put pretty simply, the majority of Americans broadly are progressive on these issues. Support BLM, all these sort of broad cultural markers. So corporations and other large entities think, we need to avoid a cancellation, we need to appeal to the business interests of this country, we need to do something to ingratiate ourselves to the majority opinion. So oftentimes, and they've done this for decades, by the way, is they find some consultants, they pay them $300,000
like Robin DiAngelo,
to come on over there, and Robin DiAngelo's job, first and foremost, is to convince everyone who hires her that she was worth that money. So is she going to come over there and write a PowerPoint don't be racist, come on, be cool? No, she has to go all out. And what you get are these cringy, the Coca-Cola PowerPoint, where you get, look, some of the things there are defensible. Does systemic racism exist? Sure. Should we be aware of the concept of implicit bias? Yeah, fine. That's good. That's just normal human things, I think. But some of the language in there really made it seem like she wanted white people to feel a little bit bad. And I don't want white people to feel bad. I don't want anyone to feel guilty over who they are.
What percentage of this country do you think supports Black Lives Matter?
Well, I know that at its peak after George Floyd's murder, it was something like 71%. I think since then it's trended downwards. Is it gone below 50?
Yes. And,
wow.
It depends on where you go. I use Civics. They have 237,458 responses from April 1st, 2018 to August 2nd, 2021. I think they do a pretty good job, but there's always, I know, a challenge with polls and whether they, their system. The peak support was 53% after the death of George Floyd. And opposition actually declined fairly steadily. There was no major spike in opposition. There was a major spike in support after the death of George Floyd. However, there was a rapid escalation of opposition. According to Civics, current support for Black Lives Matter is 45% and opposition is 42%.
Those numbers are really different from us. I might have looked at Pew Research. I couldn't tell about the methodology, which is more valid.
Well, and it's actually, CRT, the filler word, is very unpopular. So I would look at it differently. I think these corporations have been infiltrated by highly motivated activists, which you said the education system, the goal should be to create activists that have really bad ideas. And I think they're putting America on a trajectory that I think you are even concerned about. Because you said that there are some sacrosanct ideas, right? The sacrosanct ideas are general fair representation. Wokeism does not believe in that.
Well, no, that's not true. I would say, I mean, I don't know what you mean by wokeism, but I think that there are plenty of progressives.
Find it, which is that kind of idea of judging people based on skin color, discrimination.
I would say that what I've advocated for represents the supermajority of progressive opinions, and what we're largely seeing is a couple of really bad examples being brought to the limelight because they're most objectionable.
Sure. To be fair, though, I mean, you might have these very, very well thought out views of things. You could say, "Oh, that's indefensible." Of course, I don't want to be unreasonable. But when you get Mark Milley coming out and talking about white rage,
I thought his speech was lovely. It reminded me of those old Chinese philosopher generals.
But you have people quitting the military over this stuff because they feel like they're. I've actually spoken with people who retired because they've been discriminated against on racial lines they don't like. And one guy I met said he was planning a lifelong career in the military and immediately got out because they implemented these policies of like white racial trainings. They were told that the symbols of America are no longer allowed to be displayed like in private because they're extremists.
In the military?
In the military,
okay,
yes.
Well, I can't speak to any of that. I haven't looked into the particulars of that. The only thing I want to say is
like
that it feels like with
American
Robin
flag?
DiAngelo. We've seen this pattern for decades now.
No more
I don't think it
American
has anything to do with
flag in the military.
infiltration. I think it's the big ups, the CEOs, the project managers, whatever. They know there's some broader political, social, cultural trend happening, and they think, who's someone we could get? And if you look up racial sensitivity training on Google or anywhere else, some names are going to pop up, and we know which one comes up first, and they just hire that person because they've got money and they need to spend it before the end of the quarter so their budget doesn't get cut.
Do you think that it should be... How's the right way to phrase this? If a corporation were to tell, say, white employees that they had inherent characteristics based on their race, or that they should undergo some kind of course or class based on their race, should businesses be allowed to do that?
You mean legally or like morally?
Both? You know?
I suppose legally if they want to. I can understand people being upset over it. I don't think there's anything wrong with racial sensitivity training in concept. The problem is that it's almost always done by this consultant class of like upper middle class, like WASPs who are really, really intent on getting their own milquetoast veil of progressivism pushed down the throats of whoever they can have paid to listen to them. If it's a good course, everyone should be able to hear it.
Wouldn't that violate the Civil Rights Act, though?
It might. I guess that I would defer entirely to law. If it turns out to be unconstitutional, then he had it. I just want to say, though, that while we are fixating on bad behaviors here, and there's nothing wrong with that, I do maintain my insistence that I think the vast majority of progressives would agree with what I have to say. Though, keep in mind, there are always going to be a mix of good and bad ideas with good social movements. Even the Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Movement, which we all know and love today, can't deny it. There were plenty of people acting there whose ideas I disagreed with. Malcolm X when he had his black separatist phase, though he amended that before he died. There are even ideas of Martin Luther King's that I maybe could question if I spoke with him. He wrote a book after the Civil Rights Act. Where do we go from here? Chaos or something good. And he said a lot of stuff about the responsibility for white people to not make amends, but to educate themselves on the experience of black suffering so that we no longer just integrate. We truly assimilate. We know we're a collective bond. There's always going to be some disagreement. Is the movement valid? To me, a movement which recognizes the racial discrimination, the systemic racism that exists, that there are problems we have yet to overcome, this is a movement worth defending.
I just want to make some data points real quick, and then Charlie, you can come in. Man. So first, the one thing I wanted to highlight, let me actually pull this up, is that net support, which is support versus opposition. Before George Floyd died, for Black Lives Matter in this country was 16% net support. As of today, according to Civics, it's 3%. That brings it all the way back to 2018.
Just so you'll know, that's completely unsurprising to me. It went from all you would hear about Black Lives Matter is, like before George Floyd, if you polled someone and said, are you in support of Black Lives Matter? Of course, you're going to be like, yeah. But then whenever you start watching the news each night and Fox News is telling you that Black Lives Matter wants to come in your house and with Antifa super soldiers and beat you to a pulp, then a lot of people are going to say they stop feeling like they support it. Jared said a bit ago, you're providing my employer with more work out of me because If I'm listening to your stream, I might as well work while I'm at it. I'm sure they appreciate you. Well, good. I'm happy. That's interesting that that's how you do it. When I get done with work, I don't know if having something to listen to would get me back into working.
To August 16th.
But I'm glad.
Now, one of the things I think is really important to note is the severe tribalism and hyperpolarization in this country. So if we look at support for Black Lives Matter among Democrats, 86%. Support or opposition for Black Lives Matter among Republicans, 86%. Opposition, mirror image. You take a look at independents.
We're more alike than we may think, huh?
Right. You take a look at the independents, though, people who don't align. And I would say, what is the date around May 1st, there was an inversion. And now the majority of independents oppose Black Lives Matter, 44% to 39%.
That's not surprising to me, given that there's been very little in the way of optical. I'm sorry, you haven't spoken in a while. I apologize.
No,
I just want to make those data points just to clarify some things.
I wanted this to be more of a discussion than a debate, so I think it's actually really helpful. Are you concerned when certain judges or people running for DA say that accommodations on sentencing should be made on race? Does that bother you?
Tell us what bothers you, Charlie. Please stop asking these questions.
Who said that? I've never heard that before.
Well, people in law schools have been saying it.
I mean, students have always
Kim
been.
Fox in Chicago has heavily implied that communities of color need to be accommodated for in sentencing. And they've all but done this based by just getting rid of the bail laws that we've seen altogether,
Well,
right?
I mean-
Decriminalizing shoplifting, all that, please.
Oh, I'm totally okay with that. We
Okay.
lock way too many people up, just flat out. That's not
So
even...
like murder out the next day.
No, not murder. You
Well,
said shoplifting.
I would get out for dramatic purposes. I would get up and walk off camera right now. That's what like my urge was to temporarily do for a funny moment where I'm reacting. But then I remembered that I have PJs on my lower half with pugs on them. So I don't really feel like that being a part of it. But what I would have walked out of the room about is the fact that he just went, oh, they want to decriminalize shoplifting. And then Vaush goes, yeah, I'm in support of that. And Charlie goes, okay, so murder your... okay, so murder out the next day. What was that? That's... okay, so murder. So shoplifting, murder, same thing? Okay, cool.
Well, I'm just saying, just the bail reform laws in New Mexico and California have been a disaster.
Well, I can't speak to it. Oh, sorry.
Here's actually a really great point. It's a tough one for me. I agree. I think we lock way too many people up. I err on the side of liberty, innocent until proven guilty. To take a working class individual who is accused of shoplifting before he's even been proven of guilt, lock him up for several months, he loses his job. However, what do we see in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. Wave of shoplifting, businesses shutting down because when you don't stop the crime, you get, I guess, a lot of crime.
Yeah,
it's a tough issue. I wanted to let you guys.
I think we'll totally disagree on this. You first.
Maybe. Well, I've read a lot on recidivism. We have a fairly high recidivism rate in this country because really the thing that causes crime more than anything else, it's not actually poverty, it's income inequality. When poor people and rich people share the same space, it leads to a lot of problems. All poor people together in a neighborhood, what is there to steal? Poor people and rich people together in a neighborhood, there you go. You have very clean targets. And what's more, there are other forms of criminality that only really fully express themselves in the types of neighborhoods that have a really strong mix of wealthy and poor. I can see that because, again, from where I grew up, I lived on the border of a lot of low-income communities. Now, Beverly Hills, safest place you could be. 3 a.m., you want to take a jog, go for it. Seriously.
Not anymore.
Maybe. Oh, I haven't been there in like
You'd
5
be
years.
surprised. Then.
I'll say this.
Good luck
Shut
walking
up,
Rodeo
Charlie.
Drive now.
Well, okay, first of all, I don't want to walk Rodeo Drive during the daylight, okay?
Well, I agree.
I don't even know if I have anything to say. Good luck walking Rodeo Drive now.
I agree.
agree.
But, after Garcon has had his work in LA, it's a disaster.
Violent crime is down since the 90s. We've had a bit of an up since
It's
COVID,
up
but
massive in the last year.
oh, well, COVID's led to a lot of really weird exigent factors.
Well,
But
defunding the police.
with all, we haven't defunded the police anywhere.
Minneapolis.
Maybe in a couple
a lot
places.
of places.
Hold on a second. That's not true. Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, they've all cut police.
Two- I should be-
260 departments. I think it was reported.
Just to be clear, LA has fallen apart because of defund the police, which happened in Portland and Minneapolis and other places. And that affects LA falling apart? How?
last year had stripped their funding from
Sorry,
the
when you said defund, I thought I meant like the anarchist vision of like community policing. When it comes to police funds being stripped, there is a conversation to be had about the relationship between that and crime. But the crime increase seems to be all countrywide, so I don't know if I'd be leaning more towards that being a COVID thing and people being restless and angry and I don't know, aggressive. The thing that I'm trying to say though is when I grew up in Beverly Hills, really, really safe, free from violent crime. I could walk half a mile though, and the area between rich and poor were the areas where people had barred windows every time. So when it comes to criminality, there are things that we can address very fundamentally that will help everyone. I'm sure there are restructures of bail laws that we could do. I don't know the particulars. It's not my field. I've also read stuff on recidivism. Apparently, murder actually has a very low default recidivist rate because usually it's done under a very specific set of heated conditions that don't actually speak to a person's character, which makes you wonder a lot about like moral worth and what really drives a person to do that sort of thing. I think it's something we should look at critically, though I don't have any really strong data-based arguments. The last thing I want to say, because it's the first point that you brought up, is racial responses to the criminal justice system. Yeah, I didn't forget. I'm actually going to triple down on this one, okay? Not only do I think that we should aggressively look at the ways our sentencing laws affect and discriminate between black and white people and Hispanic nation, I think we should do the same between men and women. Because as much as black people are shafted by the criminal justice system, men are even more. If you take a look at the disproportionate rates of sentencing, relative levels of implicit bias in the jury, women get off with way more than men
Vaush
do.
MRA confirmed.
Way
It's true. This is one thing, conservatives. Hey, maybe you like this one that I believe. It is weird. Like I get that because men are more statistically violent, like as in they commit more violent crime. But that could be used for anything, like certain race, like we've talked about, of course. There's higher crime rate in certain neighborhoods, and then thus like on a more national scale in certain racial populations. So does that mean that they should get different sentences? Like, no. Which a lot of times they actually do. That's an issue as well. But it's whack for the exact same crimes, all the same. Oh, look how genuine of a smile that looks on Tim's face. All the same conditions, men will get hit with such a harder sentence.
more. So I mean, maybe it's something we can all agree on. We're guys, I think.
Well, so the issue though is that when you remove race, it's just a matter of income or wealth. For example, if LeBron James goes in front of a jury,
That's
he's one
not
of
true.
the best lawyers. And obviously that's an extreme example, right? But O.J. Simpson had an all-star team. And so the problem is that Obama.
So I agree it has a lot to do with wealth, but there have been lots of studies where same crime, same criminal history as far as like how many times they've offended and stuff like that, and the black guy, for example, will get more than the white guy. So that's actually not true.
He would also have good lawyers.
O.J. Simpson?
Oh,
yeah,
Obama,
no, sorry.
sorry.
I was gonna say, you didn't have Obama as a lawyer.
No.
But yeah, O.J. Simpson is gonna have a better chance getting off than some poor white guy. Yep, yes. But people in the same condition, and then when you just control for where the only thing you're looking at is race, it is discriminatory.
Let me
It's
say,
Kardashian and Dershowitz.
I would just like to interject that Obama extrajudicially assassinated people, and nobody did anything about it. So
Now that's
Drone
black
strikes.
privilege.
But
That's a joke. Don't.
So,
don't.
but I think that there's an implication in your argument that I want to challenge, which is that just because you're poor doesn't mean you commit crimes. I think that's an insult to poor people, right? And so I think that if you automatically assume that, now there are data trends to suggest that, but instead it should be the question of what are we trying to structurally do or through incentives to either punish the people that are committing crimes and lift people out of that current level. So I think it's a good talking point, but I don't think it's totally true to say we have too many people in prison. I think we have the wrong people in prison. Let me tell you why. Really quick.
We have more than like any other
gonna talk
country.
about
No.
some of
Let me tell you why.
Huge, right?
The average rapist serves 4 years in prison, and they're very likely to rape again. Totally different than
Hey,
murder.
look, if you want.
That does sound light, but also I would have to look into that. But I think most people on the left agree. I am outlining his beard with my mouse, just so you know. I think most people on the left would agree that that's so weird. We should be really hard on certain crimes. Like, yeah, of course, we should lock you up for murder and rape and stuff like that. It's just we put people in prison for having a medical issue with drugs, and then, you know, as they mentioned, we have more people than per capita than any other country, and it doesn't help. So, but yeah, the rape thing, of course. Who's advocating for rape perpetrators to get less time?
Funding that goes to police departments to go towards actually looking at the rape kits that they take rather
Well
than stuffing them
over
into a bin.
250,000 untested rape kits in the tri-state area in New York City. 250,000, right? So our criminal justice system, you could say it had nefarious intentions. I'll be neutral on that. It was very heavy on drugs, obviously in the 80s and 90s. But generally, though, you cited the number. You said violent crime's been down since the 90s. Why do you think that is? It's because we were tough on crime in the 80s, and we had a massive campaign against it, and we had the most peaceful decade in American history.
Well, there were a few factors.
Sam says, counterpoint, women are less respected, so that's why they're treated with less severity. It just happens to work out in our favor in this particular instance. I don't get what you mean. They're less respected, so they get less time? Like how that works out. So do we need to do something about our overpopulated prison system? Oh, we do. Sorry. I don't know why I added a so there. That was a statement. We do need to. I agree. That's for sure. Jonathan said he's not being neutral by prefacing it like that. Yeah. Well, anytime you say that you're neutral or that you don't want to speak to a particular issue that has a really clear, like, negative that was so bad way to say that. There's certain issues that if you don't take a stance on or you say you're neutral, it means you're just on the other side. A good example of this is if you say, this is analogous, it's not the exact same, but if you say, hey, are you vaccinated? And someone goes, oh, I'm not comfortable sharing that with you, and I just think that vaccination is a private medical decision, and that violates my medical privacy. They're unvaccinated, right? You know, you can't be neutral on certain things, or it's obvious what you're saying.
The viability of broken windows policing has been challenged substantially, but there are admittedly some benefits. The argument that I would make is that what you're really doing is you're forestalling the problem. There are socioeconomic conditions that increase criminality, not because
Sam says like we aren't taken seriously. Maybe. Like people think, oh, they're not actually that big of a risk because they're not that physically threatening or something like that. Maybe so, but like let's say a woman does a really bad murder, and if a man did the exact same murder, I just think the best that we should be equal across the board with that type of stuff.
it makes people worse people, but just because oftentimes crime isn't some direct indicator of poor moral conduct. Oftentimes it is a crime of necessity, or it is a crime born of the...
Sam also says, or at least I've experienced being taken less seriously than men all the time. Just my perspective. Oh, 100%. 100%. You will... You're much more likely to be taken less seriously as a woman in so many settings. That's absolutely true.
discontent and the apathy.
I got to challenge you on that.
That's why Taylor Swift's song, The Man, is such a good song. You should all listen to it. I would play it on a stream, but I get copyrighted. Such a good song.
What would be a crime of necessity today with the welfare state that we have? What would possibly be a crime of necessity?
I know I can at least speak to personal experience that I knew some people involved in like they said they would sometimes peddle drugs, and they did it because while they may have been accounted for by the welfare state, their parents' medical bills weren't, not sufficiently, not even close. Stuff like that. Now maybe legally if that person got arrested, the law says they have to be. I could never morally condemn them. They were trying to save their mom, man.
But
so,
I got to push back on that.
Sure.
I mean, for sure it's anecdotal, but
it is. So it's not like a data point.
It's not, I never understood this, having grown up on the South Side. Seeing people sell drugs is not the fastest and easiest way to make money for someone who's desperate. I mean, no joke.
Plasma sales? What would you say?
I made $140 per hour playing guitar in front of a baseball field. Now, I understand everyone can play guitar.
Skateboard.
Or skateboard. True. I knew a guy who said he bought T-shirts. He went and bought bulk T-shirts. So the people who are selling drugs, they got to buy the drugs first, or they get a loan. And
you know, a lot of people sell drugs to make money, and they think it's like an easy way to make a lot of money, but I played guitar for a baseball stadium. because there's lots of guitar playing positions at baseball stadiums.
And you can do the same thing with socks. And then people go on the side of the road and sell socks. I think the choice of committing a crime was a choice.
Well, it is. Well, hold on. It is always a choice. But what we're really talking about is the limits of determinism here. How much do we choose the things we do? You can make an argument that it's all. I mean, you're religious, of course, so you wouldn't have this argument. But
I wouldn't have anything close to this argument.
Right. From a secular perspective, you can make the argument that at the end of the day, the things we do are driven entirely by the chemical reactions in our brain, and therefore everything that we do from start to finish is just a combination of random molecular patterns and blah blah. We don't live our lives like that. Obviously, I make a choice to get dressed every day. We know how this works in practice, but in practice, we are also the product of our environment. And the fact that, for example, having a single parent while growing up is a pretty strong criminal indicator is a suggestion that, I mean, is it an indicator of a person's inherent moral worth that they were born with a single parent? Probably not. So that statistical difference has to be accounted for by the inevitable fact that environmental differences can lead to harsh outcomes.
The question is, though, do you then create a set of lack of enforcement to say that we're actually not going to enforce looting, where you had an entire article in National Public Radio, not saying you believe this, that says the case for looting, right? San Francisco's basically employed this, $900 or less.
This is something that I wanted to talk about before. You can, like, I think the left accidentally stumbles into defending, like, directly advocating for looting. It's kind of weird. I think you can say, don't do this thing. That's bad. And we should recognize what rudimentary or systemic things are leading to that. You know? My ears hurt. I guess these squeeze too hard. Like with the case of shoplifting. Yeah, don't shoplift. No, don't shoplift. Bad. But also, in addition, we should figure out why are people shoplifting and then address those issues. If you solved poverty, I'm not saying it's that simple, but I'm saying, like, let's just say in a world that you did, I bet you there'd be very little shoplifting. It would be teenagers trying to get an adrenaline rush. So you can simultaneously recognize that something's wrong and also figure out why that wrong thing is happening and try to address those concerns, and recognize that you're not necessarily a horrible, terrible criminal if you feel rightfully or wrongfully that you've been forced into shoplifting, for example. But again, you don't have to, like, say that it's a good thing, because don't steal other people's property.
They're not going to prosecute you, right? Videos of them stealing entire Walgreens, right?
Bad.
Not an exaggeration. And then you have, and just one other data point, just because of COVID, Europe's crime rates did not increase. Ours did. And we had a massive defund police, almost kind of, we're going to be relaxed on criminality type movement. And this is the question, right? Which is, how many excuses or accommodations are we going to give for crime?
Well, we're not.
And I'm just just to finish, is that my perspective obviously is very little to none. Crime's a necessity. I could think of one, maybe two examples where I would make a moral claim of a crime of necessity, and that would be a revenge crime if someone murdered your wife or your kid. Maybe.
Necessity?
I'm not saying necessity. I'm saying like a moral accommodation where I could say I could see where they came from. Not necessity. Let me rephrase that. But the idea that in the welfare state that we have, with the private philanthropy kind of generosity we have, that shoplifting and arson and looting, mugging Barbara Boxer, that we should just say, it's actually because of the environment.
I don't know why you pointed at me when
no,
you said I have never mugged Barbara Boxer.
I'm saying that as an example.
Yeah, I don't mean.
Was that you in San Francisco?
Where were you?
No, I've gotten stolen from in San Francisco before. It was a very fun experience. That was back before YouTube too, so I couldn't afford to replace anything. Okay, a lot to respond to here. Emil Durkheim, cool guy, dead now, thought that crime was sociologically useful because it shows you where the antagonisms are between people's wants and the state's desires. So crime takes place where there's an agitation between what people are being compelled to do by whatever, their own behavior, their desires, and what the state will allow you to do. So for example, during a food shortage, we can take like Ireland during the potato famine. There were, to put it lightly, quite a few cases of theft during that time because people needed food. They would do anything for it. So the crime of theft in that instance becomes a sociological indicator of a social need that isn't being met. Now today, of course, we do have admittedly a fairly weak but existent welfare state.
It's rather we do strong. Have very generous.
It's a little baby welfare
multi-trillions
state.
of dollars every year.
Yeah, multi-trillion for America?
I will say
You can get
Quadrillions.
$70,000 in value a year. That's plenty.
I want a UBI. We can go way harder.
We do have UBI. We just implemented it with the stimulus.
No, we don't. No, well, wait, hold on. Yes, the child
Yes, we
tax
did.
credits with well, no,
People
that's
got
really
cash
good.
checks. We have UBI now.
Well, it's not a long.
Stop being annoying. Like, for example, Ben Shapiro. He's just as conservative and just as whatever you would think bad about Charlie, I think is similar about Ben. Okay, but I don't watch Ben and go like, ugh, why are you like all weird and cringy? Even though I don't like his points, I can watch him and not be like, ew. But like that, we have UBI now. Yeah, no, we don't. Universal basic income. The idea is it's reoccurring. We had 2 stimulus checks, and everyone recognized it wasn't going to be a reoccurring thing for more than the crisis.
Standing program.
I'll admit that, but we've tried UBI and crime went up.
Well, hold on. Wait. I need to reject the
We
spurious.
send checks, people commit crimes. Huh.
Hold on. This is a spurious correlation, okay? First of all, you will not be able to find any analysis
Causation?
that attributes the increase in crime to people getting their stimulus checks.
No, I'm saying it's the opposite. The argument you're making is that if people have a sociological need, they won't commit the crime. So people got money and they still committed crimes.
Yeah, but it doesn't always like correspond 1-to-1 like that. The
Totally
reason why
agree.
people needed money is because they weren't getting any money from their jobs because they couldn't work their jobs. So people were still in a worse
Well,
position.
they also
than
got
they were
unemployment.
otherwise.
Remember, very generous unemployment.
The unemployment started
plus
pretty generous.
$600 to $800, right? I think it was a week or a month, right? It was
It's
very
still
generous.
currently
That run through,
$300
and not
bonus.
everyone is applicable for unemployment. There are a lot of conditions there that can make that difficult.
No, they
to
were
apply
very
for.
generous. They didn't
Well,
turn
hold on,
anyone down
wait,
during
we're,
the lockdown.
We're, very,
That's-
we're being very spurious with our
we're very
correlations right
wonky.
now.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm just
Oh God, where was I?
something about some dead guy about how crime is helpful.
I love dead white guys. That's my. I actually don't know if their crime was white. So I'm not pro crime.
See,
not pro criminal.
This is what I was saying about Charlie being willing to debate.
I'm
like,
pro leniency only insofar.
Whoops. He's actually giving Vaush a chance to, actually advocate for his views, and right there, he stopped chucking talking points and like actually realized that Vaush was trying to make a point. Like that's not something that all people do in a debate. Like, so okay, some respect there.
Whereas I believe it helps to lower our recidivism. Sometimes it finds that it does. For example, you're in prison for 20 years. What do you know? You know the inside of a jail cell. The environment in prison is very bad at encouraging people to get their life together when they get out. And that's why so many people, they get out of prison, they have 6 months on the street before they're back in. Sometimes it's because they want to go back in. Prison's all they know. They did a movie about that. Sorry.
Shawshank Redemption.
And it was a good movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, which only serves my point. But with regards to like being lax on crime or whatever, there are a couple of things I think we should all agree to. Okay, first of all, well, maybe we wouldn't. Drugs is bad. We need to stop locking people up for weed, just flat out. I think that drugs in general should be treated like a medical issue. Portugal did that. They decriminalized all drugs. So
There's conflicting data on Portugal, but fine.
it's pretty promising. So you take like heroin. Nobody wants to be on heroin, okay? If you're on heroin, in the fleeting moments you have in between your little sessions, you know something's up. So you treat that like a medical
little
issue. Say, hey, we have
session.
government offices. You want to come by?
The heck?
That helps. Far fewer overdose deaths. And those people, they go ahead, they become socially productive. Bam. No crime. They contribute to the economy. It just works better than locking them.
I'm a flat earther said, hey, the Bible say earth is flat. Does it? I have never heard that. Does the Bible say the earth is flat? Question mark. Why can't I get a simple answer? Okay, looks like there might be some verses that did not promote a flat earth. Maybe some verses that make it seem that way. I don't know. Not too relevant. Hopefully you were saying it in like a, so that means you shouldn't take it literally. Hopefully not like that's actually your, I'm hoping it was ironic and not your actual belief.
Them up.
I wanted to say something you mentioned with UBI, you mentioned with the unemployment, the stimulus. First of all, we've actually had a really hard time hiring for specific work, like labor stuff, because nobody wants to work. And no joke, like I've been having conversations like every other day, like, can we find some people? And it's like, we can't find anybody. We got signs up and down all throughout the area where it's like, come in, open interviews.
So many.
We had over 800 flights canceled due to staffing shortages. And now we're facing fuel shortages because of the trucker shortage. We're looking at this this unemployment stimulus thing where they're doing the $300 bonus. Now they're doing the child tax credit, which won't be for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a correlation with massive job openings and people not taking these jobs.
I think it's phenomenal. Finally, the bargaining power is in the hands of the workers more so.
But it's broken. Like the flights are shutting down. Nobody wants the jobs, even when they do increase the salaries.
So it's true, the flights are an issue. But here's what they don't tell you in the news briefs. So stock buybacks, something that many companies.
Yeah, a story came out too about an airline or some company who kept complaining about not being able to find employees, and then I forget. Gosh, too many things in my head. Yeah, and then the internal employees said that pretty much they weren't actually, or someone here got it. Somebody went to a bunch of companies. I'm mixing two stories. This was the first one. Somebody went to a bunch of companies and applied, and they said, we're hiring, and it was a low-level service position. It wasn't like they had to be qualified, and they didn't get hired at any of them, and I think they submitted fake applications, so then it looked really qualified. And then a different story was internal reporting. I feel weird because I'm talking way too vaguely, but pretty much there's an element of a real labor crisis, as in not enough workers for how many jobs, and there was at this time. But as Vaush is saying, like, I would rather the power be in the hands of the workers, because they are the, necessity that everyone's looking for, then way too many workers for the jobs, and so then the companies get to pay them terrible wages and treat them however they want, because they know you can't go anywhere else. Like, there's barely any jobs. Sam said, not that proves the earth is flat either way. There may be some verses that say something about the firmament that I've heard flat earthers say is proof. Well, yeah, I wasn't saying it would prove it, obviously. Was curious. And then I'm a flat earther said, earth is immovable. Earth is fixed. Earth has four corners. Job describes a strong job. Oh, maybe God describes a strong firmament. The sun was created on day 4 inside the firmament. I don't know what's happening, which either makes science or God a liar. Are you trolling right now? Or like you actually believe this stuff? Because, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that doesn't quite line up with science. And I think most people who read the Bible, I don't know, who knows? A lot of people who read the Bible, I'll say, recognize that you can believe based on the stories in there, the principles and stuff like that, but maybe don't get too literal, or it won't line up with stuff that is tough to believe to be untrue.
Now do because of their decriminalization. The airline companies have spent an anomalous amount of their profits each year on stock buybacks to enrich their CEOs and shareholders, rather than on hiring more pilots.
I'm a flat earther, so I believe the Bible.
This is a simple supply-demand issue. People need to raise their wages. Do you see these news stories?
Oh my goodness, I'm a flat earther. Would you come on the show and debate me? If you're actually real? Flat earther versus reasonable person? I'm kidding. Not really. That would be so fun. Let me know if you're comfortable being on camera and we can do a debate. How would I I never thought I'd be debating whether the earth was flat. Copernicus changed the shape in the 1500s? Like, changed our perception of the shape? I know I want to be watching this, but this is so much more fun. Or actually change the shape of the earth? Like, which one was it?
From time to time, where it's like, I raised my wage to $15 an hour, and people showed up.
I still have a part of me that thinks you're trolling.
Yeah, that is how economics works.
We had John Schnatter, Papa John, on the show, and he told us a story about a pizzeria where they were paying $35
I don't want to hear
an
from
hour
Papa
to
John's
pizza
ever again.
cooks or bakers, because that was the line. He kept trying to find people, nobody would do it. He kept raising wages. Finally, he settled on $35 an hour. That means pizzas are going to basically more than double, because the wage they were paying before was like 15, and now they're over double what they were paying in labor. Their labor costs go up. They have no choice but to charge
So dumb. So dumb. He just said that Papa John's said they raised their wages to $35 an hour. Wow, that's a lot. And that resulted, at least this is what Tim Pool said, in them having to raise their wages by over double. Okay. Before they were $15 an hour is what he said. They brought up to 35. Can we all just, for the sake of math, so I can explain, bring it up to 30? Bring it down to 30? So that's a clean double? Okay. Do you understand how a business works? You don't have one cost as a business, and it's just labor. You have, let's see. Actually, every company is very different, but a lot of times, I think I saw somebody explaining that it's in the service industry, it can be up to, or like around 20% of your company's costs is labor. So how would doubling the labor double the cost of the pizza? The pizza would just have to go up like 20%. Which this is the point. When people say like, oh, costs are going to go up if you raise the minimum wage. Yeah, a marginal amount. And now everyone's going to have much more purchasing power. People get that. It's so annoying. Like, now if you double the price of labor, you're going to have to double the entire price of all the products. I mean, think about like a pizza place. You got to pay for the rent of the building. You have to pay, let's say the benefits cost, if you have that, will stay the same. You have to buy all the materials for all the pizza stuff. It's, go look up, y'all, anytime you are talking with someone. Oh, what company are you talking about? And then just see if you can find what, or just an industry. What's the average percentage that labor costs in the food industry, and it's impossible to think that a company would have to double their, product costs. Sorry, I'm getting slow-minded right now.
Substantially more for pizza. In the short term, within a month or so, that might have an impact on those pizza makers. But the ripple effect is going to slam into everybody. All of a sudden, the contractor can't afford to take his family out for dinner. He can't afford to buy the food he wants, because the base level costs are going to start going up. Then the landlords aren't going to be able to hire the maintenance crews to fix the buildings. The landlords are on fixed pricing, which they can't change, which then results in a brick wall, a collapse.
I just want to say, what we're having right now is an unprecedented economic shock. For a year, nobody worked, or very few people worked. And people got used to staying at home. And as the government should, it should have done more, but as the government should, it took care of them a little bit. We have to ride this out. What are government funds for but riding us out through common crises? Better this than war. And now people are returning to work, and they're realizing work sucks. Work sucks everywhere. But in this country, compared to maybe some of our equally developed contemporaries, work really sucks. The work culture, our rate of overproductivity, Americans more than any other developed country, by the way, we push our workers hard. And you have favorable employment numbers, but you don't have favorable underemployment numbers. There are a lot of people who have jobs, but they have like 2 to 3 part-time jobs. They don't get their schedule for the next month until like 2 weeks before the end of the current one. They're constantly worrying about whether or not they're going to make their shifts line up to get enough hours to get the money they need to pay down their student debt along with the rent and everything. Yeah. It sucks. And it's...
You know how stressful that is? I recently stopped, but I was working a waiter job, and people, you have to work. Luckily, I wasn't concerned about. No, well, I mean, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. As he said, you don't know what your schedule is going to be. You don't know how many hours you're going to be shifted. You have to coordinate 2 separate jobs in the hours. If they overlap, you got to contact this boss. And then you don't know how much your paycheck is going to be for any job that's tipped. You have no clue. I mean, unless all your tips are in cash. Most of the time, they get put into your pay. You have zero clue what your paycheck is going to be each time. And so you're balancing 2 schedules, 2 complete jobs, exhausting. And then also you can't exactly specifically budget out your spending because you don't know how much it's going to end up being. It's a lot. That's why it makes me so mad when people act like, we'll just work harder. Rich people are rich because they worked hard. It's like, yeah, I'm sure they put in hard work, but so are the people standing on their feet at a restaurant. You know how difficult and tiring service work is like that? And working 16 hours in a day just to pay for their, rent and kids' food and all those things. They're hard workers. They just don't have the connections and maybe the education and stuff like that to translate that hard work into passive income like wealthy people are able to do.
Untenable, and we are in an era of unprecedented record profits for CEOs. So yes, I think the solution to this, and it'll be a rough one, that's for sure, is we should normalize higher wages. Maybe the solution to $15 an hour was never a federal mandate. Maybe it was the inevitable economic necessity of incentivizing workers.
Hard to disagree with a lot of that. I will say that the lockdowns were way too harsh and intense. I will say there is a Fifth Amendment argument to be made, though, that if the government forces you to not work, then you should be able to get something in return. The government cannot take something from you constitutionally and not pay you for it. That's the eminent domain argument, right? Which was one of the best arguments for the stimulus package. I just think the lockdowns were far too severe and far too intense and really infringed on people's liberties and abilities to be able to take risks. I want to go a different direction. I just want to ask you a question. It's just more kind of about human nature. Do you think human beings are naturally good or naturally bad as human nature?
Tabula rasa. I really think we are.
Blank slate.
Maybe there's some inclination. We're hardwired to be social. I know that. We're also, at least to some extent, hardwired to be self-serving. The best society merges those two. The best interest for you is the best interest for everyone. The social contract from now until we die.
Locke's, Rousseau's, or Hobbes? Which social contract?
I guess I would just say the ubiquitous philosophical term more so than
well, because they all wrote on those terms, right? And they totally disagreed.
They all thought different things of humans. They all thought
Hobbes had a very dark view, Rousseau very positive, Locke was more neutral.
Socialists tend to think that human beings are fundamentally positive, but I reject that.
That's why I'm curious, because you see way too cynical for that.
Well, the implicit suggestion to that, to me, is that socialists think their system would only work if everyone was nice, and I don't believe that. I think that the best economic systems will work when everyone is an absolute POS, just a dirty.
Yes. So I generally find the whole in relation to politics, like are people good or bad thing, kind of dumb, because regardless, unless you can know 100% what human nature is, which we can't, then you have to structure a system in such a way that if people were inherently bad, it would still work. You can't depend your political system on the abstract hope that people are naturally good. So in considering a political ideology and system, you should assume that people are bad so that you can create a system that can still work under that. Even if personally you want to believe, or you do believe, that people are born into this world good.
Horrible human being.
Or very
incentivize them. Well, but it should. Maybe humans are amazing, but the best system should survive human greed.
I want to ask you a very simple and general question.
Uh-oh. Those are the worst ones to answer.
It is. Do you think some people are better than other people?
Can I add a bit of nuance to that answer?
Answer however you want.
I think that some people have been developed to be more moral and of better character.
Oh no, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean moral.
Just better, like they're taller.
That's it.
Oh,
However, but I think your interpretation of the question is part of the answer.
By any metric, there will always be people who are better than others. Always, perhaps by some combination of environment and genetics. I just hope that we can all ride along beside each other.
I agree. I think I mentioned this before the show. If you were to ask anybody on the left or the right, what did you want? It would be like for everyone to prosper, for people to be successful, to pull people out of poverty, things like that. I guess the issue is disagreeing on how we get there.
Well, I think I'm not sure if we want the same thing. I want more a preservation and conservation of what we already have.
Do you want socialism?
Absolutely not.
Oh, no. Slight ideological
No, but come on.
I mean, we don't need to play the word games. Go ahead.
Why do you want to preserve?
Well, I think that we have something beautiful, unique, and exceptional. And I take the more Hobbesian view of human nature, which is we're brutish and nasty and awful and cruel. And the fact we've been able to build something decent and civil is pretty remarkable.
But are you saying that we have a good system?
A great system.
And
Again, so what's... It's pretty amazing. We've been able to build something amazing. Yes. And that building process is what made us this amazing. And if we're here now, why wouldn't we believe that we can build more and make it more amazing? Unless you literally think we live in a perfect society, which no one would say that. If you did, I don't know. You're dumb. Let's see. I'm a Flat Earther said 100% serious. Look up Celebrate Truth and Rob Skiba. Anyway, I'm not comfortable in front of a camera, but thanks for the offer. Okay, cool. Baltazar said, the question is wrong. If a worker can get a livable wage, then something is wrong with the company. Oh, can't get a livable wage, then something's wrong with the company. Yeah. True. Sam said, that was me pre-pandemic, multiple job hustle, then I lost them both suddenly. I've really valued the chance to reset. America has issues right now and things are getting so expensive. Got to fix it. Totally agree with you. And then you also talked about, in what I was saying about making a system that can overcome bad people, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Agree again. Jonathan said, if our systems are so great and don't need to change, then why are so many people living in poverty? Amen.
And people thrive from the system?
Yeah, I think people flourish and thrive. I think that a rights-based system is naturally the best way to govern.
Do you want people to be stripped of their rights, imprisoned, brutalized, impoverished?
Of course not. No. And, I mean, the sacrificing of rights is something that usually has to be earned negatively, like murdering somebody.
So this is what I mean, because I think I could ask you the same question. You know, do you want people to be brutalized, impoverished, imprisoned?
Of course not.
Taking their rights away?
But I would never want to grow complacent. You're both familiar with the Marxian theory of dialectic materialism,
You
correct?
mean Hegel's theory?
Oh no, he had the dialectic, and we built on it, you know, or he built.
I'd love to get into,
no.
I really want to get into the Marx thing because I'm
I said
super
he.
fascinated by it.
No, I just want to say, you know, the theory, I mean, put simply, I guess, is that human society, the human project, it evolves as a product of antagonism, grinding antagonism between people in Marxian view
It's
of
very,
different.
it's very Hegelian. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, he was a student of Hegel.
I know he was part of this. He was the young Hegelian.
Yeah,
he won
no,
the argument.
Well, no, I'm not. Well, you're not. I'm just saying, like, he would get mad at you if you said he was Hegelian influence, but I don't think I would. Hegel was a smart guy. I just can't read his work because
The phenomenology of spirit is impossible to read.
Thank you. All right, I was worried you're going to make fun of me. I just want to say.
No, it's really hard. He made the
It's
very
a brick.
simple complex.
Yeah, he was.
We
really
agree
good
on
at that.
something.
I just want to say. Sorry. I just want to. The project of humans moving forward. I think that antagonism fuels it, but in the best way. Not antagonism like war, but antagonism in the sense that we look at our ideas, our values, and we challenge them.
So I just want to say something we disagree on. I don't think humanity is a project.
Do you think we're headed towards something better than what we have today?
Probably not. I think that we're probably engaging in the second law of thermodynamics currently. That we're untangling. We're going to chaos, not order.
See, this to me, this is the thing, and I'm not trying to patronize. Conservatives have been shown to be more fearful on average, and I think if they thought that way, it would be very warranted.
But some fears are legitimate. You know,
Certainly.
Winston Churchill's fears about the evil Germans were legitimate.
No, I'm not. No, fear is not always illegitimate, and there are elements of this. I think, though, that if society is to collapse, it would probably be from climate change more so than like the.
Oh, come on. You don't believe that.
No, for sure. You can. We'll see it, assuming COVID doesn't get you.
You don't. I'm not even gonna rant about that. He just went. You don't believe that.
We'll live to see some
Assuming.
pretty
You
severe.
hear that?
We see it right now.
You know, my problem is,
Oh,
you know, like I see all the news, I see all the arguments about climate change, and I'm like, I understand them. And then you get Obama buying beachfront property, you get the celebrities flying airplanes, and I'm like, how am I supposed to trust any of
Bernie,
these people?
got to get burned.
So annoying. Like the Bernie thing. Bernie says he wants to fix climate change, but then he has flies on a private plane that uses a lot of fuel and has whatever. If you understand what causes climate change, you understand that simply individual actions by citizens is not the most effective or even likely in any way to get us to where we need to go. The way we have to do that is by, on a large scale, using the government, regulate and mobilize certain industries, because that's where the core of the issues are when it pertaining to the environment. So because Obama says that he wants to ameliorate the issues with the climate crisis, I've given up on this sentence, guys. Just because he says that doesn't mean that he can't also be, not always do the right thing as an individual for the environment. Because as long as he's taking actions on behalf of the government, which has the real effect, then that's what matters. I'm sorry, I really gave up kind of mid-spiel there.
Bernie, guy rode the train to work. He didn't have to do that. Bernie's the man.
True revolutionary. So,
Just to finish the point. I'm sorry, because I kept getting sidetracked.
but the idea of the human project is super interesting to me because that's a collision point we're going to have. So,
Yeah, well, I'd like to think, people have always said this is the best it gets. The Postmaster General back in, was it the Postmaster?
Baltazar said, we don't take the right to vote to anyone, even when jailed, and I like that. Democracy should be a right for everyone. We do take it from people in jail. Oh, you're probably in a different country, aren't you? I see. Gotcha.
Master General? Was it the patent
No, the
office?
patent office
master?
1900. All the patents have been made.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm
and-
not saying it's the best it's been. I'm not saying improvement is not possible.
Maybe we can
Don't get
make
me don't
little
get me-
improvements, but when I try to put myself in the shoes of men past, you know, I don't know, somebody in feudal China. And to them, what I live in today would have been incomprehensible to them in every imaginable sense, every conceivable way. But their arguments for the permanence of society then would have been better than mine today because they would have lived in a stable feudal society for millennia. And today, I now am here using technology that would have been alien to humans 20 years ago.
I think about like the Cultural Revolution. I think about the revolution in Russia. And you mentioned the conservatives tend to be more fearful. And I think there's history that shows us things can go bad. You can have something that's good, not great, could probably be better, and then end up with an unchecked movement that results in millions dead.
Here's the answer to that, guys. Because the point that he's making is you can have something good that could be better, and then it can fall apart. I agree with you 100%. People trying to make it better in a serious, genuine sense is not the reason that it's falling apart. Now, someone would counter me and say, well, you know, Hitler said that he was trying to make Germany better. Okay. That's what he said. He said many things that were lies. So, and you're not, like, we're going to argue about what making a society better is, but Charlie's pretty much admitting, yeah, I'm okay, kind of okay, just conserving what we have and not trying to make it better because I don't want it to fall apart. It's going to fall apart if it's going to fall apart. I think the best way to preserve something is to continue making it better. And you're definitely not going to cause it to fall apart by people genuinely trying to make an effort to reasonably make it better.
For sure.
20 to 40 million, I think, in the Cultural Revolution. We had Lily Tomlin Williams on the other night, and she was telling us these stories. They're scary.
Always hindsight, right?
So
Because
scary.
people thought this about every major event in social progress in America's history as well. The breakup, the Confederacy, the Civil War, the fight to abolish slavery, sure. You know, suffrage for women, yes. The Civil Rights Act, yes. Gay marriage, yes. Every time we make a step forward, you're probably anti-gay marriage, right? Because are you?
I'm pro-traditional marriage.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
right. Anti-gay marriage.
Pro-tradition. Yeah.
Gotcha. Every
Different
time,
definitions.
One man, one woman.
every time we take a step forward.
Shut up with that. I'm pro this or pro. No, pro means that you're in support of, but that doesn't stipulate that you're against something else. So pro traditional marriage would be, I prefer traditional marriage, but I'm okay with that. That's what that would mean, right? Anti-gay marriage is when you don't want that to even be allowed. So, and that's, I assume, what he is.
Well, we agreed on the 3-parent household before.
I disagreed on
That was
polyamory, actually.
50% more efficient than the previous method.
And
That's not actually a study, is it?
And 10 times more
like,
chaotic
are you actually
and
citing
way
something?
more perverse.
Possibly
I'm not actually citing anything.
Possibly not a linear growth pattern with
Yeah, maybe
parents in a household.
It's actually exponential. It just goes up forever.
Yeah, that's
Albert
very.
Einstein had 12 parents. It's
Yes.
just-
By the time you hit 12 parents, the children just a god, by the way. Just a
Yeah,
It's
little
like a
glowing-
warp scale
Very,
chart.
very, very Ubermensch, but continue, yeah.
Sorry. It always feels like everyone argues, like this is the best it gets, and any future steps would be treacherous. But then we always make that next step. I don't know if America's going to be around forever. We're a young country, and countries far older than ours have fallen in the lifetime of America. So I can't look at what we have today, or the people that I live with, or the values that I believe in, and assign to them a feeling of permanence. But I can say this. I fear stagnation. And every country
Jonathan said, tell me you're a bigot without saying you're a bigot, Charlie.
that has ever set itself upon
I'm pro-gay
stagnation
marriage.
has always
I mean,
died.
sorry.
Every
That's not
time.
it. I'm
Every
pro-traditional
country
marriage.
always seeks to better itself. And maybe that road to betterment leads to ruin, but the path of stagnation is always ruinous.
I agree. Our culture has stagnated severely. One thing I always bring up is like Christmas music written in the 50s. We still play it nonstop over and over again.
Thank you.
Movies have become repetitive, redundant, reboots. It's devolved from where we had these interesting pieces of art to just regurgitated crap over and over again.
Can I just take some exception with your argument? First of all, there is this kind of revisionist belief that somehow conservatives, in the traditional sense, were against some of those social movements, which is just not true. Now, I'm not saying you'd be a Confederate, and I'm not even getting to the party switching thing, but there is a direct lineage between hyper-focusing on racial politics in the 1860s and the 1920s, and some of the people on the American left that are just completely obsessed with American, racial politics.
It's equality versus hierarchy, right?
But what do you mean by that?
Well, back then, the slave owners wouldn't have been like, I'm really obsessed with race.
Right.
Well, equality. Now, it's obsession with race can be,
Thank you. Charlie, he's trying to say that it's the same people, like as far as the ideology, doing racial oppression as the people who may be going too far trying to do racial equality. I hate to say it, but if it's okay No, it's not. But like, it's not your fault. You're not the same, but you are a part of the same ideological lineage as a conservative as all of those old things. At each step of the way, just listen to this. At each step of the way in America's history, there's been a push for progress and then a group resisting progress. And he's admitted he wants to conserve what we have and not improve it. And not make it better, not push for change. Almost like you want to conserve the America that I knew that allowed us to be allowed us not to have our kids go to the school that's integrated, or like to a school that's integrated. Like it's the same mindset of, I want to conserve the America that I believe is whatever. Whereas what I think is the progressive ideological lineage is wanting to constantly, restlessly, indefinitely push to make people's lives better. And when there's big, obvious injustices like racial injustice, or, you know, marriage equality or trans rights, we're gonna address those, because that's a very identifiable way to improve the lives of people, and that's what our mission is. And maybe people go too far, and maybe people are dumb in our movement and have bad views about what it means to improve people's lives. Okay, but in a general sense, what I think our movement represents is one that is indefinitely and tirelessly going to push for people's lives to be better. And that, to me, is worth supporting, even if we go wrong sometimes. And let's say we push past all these obvious things, all these big injustices, then it's just going to be things on smaller levels, and that's beautiful. And I'm excited for that, because that's what people say, well, where does it end? We'll just keep trying to make people's lives better.
Pernicious in many ways, but I think there's a pretty big difference between being obsessed with the idea of racial equality and being obsessed with
I think
racial
it's equally
domination.
as pernicious, just they don't have the power to implement it. But we kind of already did that.
Do you
whole
think
discussion.
I'd do that? Like
You? No, I don't think you would. I mean, I don't know you well enough. You seem rather decent.
I try my best.
But
like
I wouldn't give power to Nicole Hannah-Jones.
I don't know who that is.
She founded the 1619 Project.
Oh, I just read the thing. I don't know much
we have
of the
a
knowledge.
constitution to prevent us against people like that. What I'm saying, though, is that, for example, I'm not against social change. I mean, I'd love to abolish abortion, for example. I'd love to put fathers back in the home.
No doubt.
So conservatives are not necessarily always saying, no, we don't want to improve, we want to stagnate. We want the correct form of social change.
So let me ask this then. Let's get to the core of it then. What values are you looking to maximize? Not
this is
just
a great
like
question.
not just like morality, because that could be the same thing or different things to anyone. But if you were to look at a society and were asked to assess its worth, what metrics would you look towards?
It's ability to defend those that can't defend themselves.
Okay.
Charity, generosity, integrity, faith to your creator, the ability to pass down good and moral values to the next generation, one that believes in work and one that believes in the cause of the nation above the self.
All right.
I've got an idea.
I think that's a
with
fairly collectivist point, that last one, though, wouldn't it be?
Well,
God, the nation above itself.
I mean,
Stalin,
you could call it collectivist, but I wouldn't say the state. I'd say the idea of the nation, right? So there's two different things, and those are conflated sometimes by libertarian socialist types, which is a walking contradiction. I'd love to ask you about that.
Sure.
But just like it's kind of just being
I
like
might
a Christian
answer
atheist,
I
right?
might answer it when you're done, by the way, because I think my follow-up might touch on that.
But the state is a creation of the people. The people are the country. That's why our Constitution, the preamble, says we the people, not we the federal government, right? So the people are the nation. And so that's why I differentiate between the two. Do you have a loyalty? Do you have a belief that you want to create something bigger than yourselves? I think that's a moral good.
To me, and I mean this without meaning to hyperbolize, but to me that's always strung rather fascist. The myth of the common man, the people, the Volk, the idea that there is a state, and Germany was a state, of course, but Hitler didn't really appeal to the state. It was the concept of the fatherland that he really hit on, and the people were a beating heart of the fatherland. They were an instrumental organ. And to me, the problem with this is that when you get down to it, this thought process, this mentality, it drives men to do terrible, terrible things. Because interpersonally, all of the chemical effects of empathy kick in. I look at you, I see you. But you start bringing in concepts like the nation, the fatherland, and it becomes very easy to convince people to compel themselves towards courses that they would otherwise not.
So expected you to use a 1930s reference earlier, so congratulations.
No, well, I'm only saying, I'm not calling you a fascist. I'm only saying
no, I know
that
you did do the correct. I didn't mean to hyperbolize, but there's other nations today that have those values that we would never call fascist, like Japan. Japan has very strict immigration.
Well, I think Korea is actually a better example, to be honest.
I really don't like either of those countries for the reasons that I
You don't like
described.
Korea?
I think they're both deeply conservative countries.
I
that-
agree with you.
Right.
They're
yeah.
wonderful.
And I think they do so in part because there's a degree of anti-individualism in the subservience they all expect of the common good. Now, it's funny. I feel like our roles are being reversed a little bit here.
Isn't that interesting?
The common good isn't something I appeal to. For me, the value I want to
No,
maximize.
I just appeal to the good,
the good. Sure, the
which
good
is two different things.
is freedom. That's what I care about.
What? How's that a political? I just appeal to the good. Well, yeah, that's the whole question. What is the good? I think people a little bit disagree on that.
Most. And that's what libertarian socialism is about. There are many types of freedoms, positive and negative. If I might indulge very briefly, like, is a man thrown to a
It's like,
law?
People always ask me, what is my political ideology? I tell them, I just look at any situation and do the right thing.
Lawless desert without food, water, or clothing free? Really asking.
So probably no.
I agree. He's free to die.
But that's an extreme example,
Sure.
not applicable in modern wealthy America
No,
or
but-
any Western nation.
But it's a philosophical base.
It's also a Rousseauian argument. Man's born free, and he spends the rest of his life in chains. It's
Right.
just anti-commercial in nature.
Well, no, but it's a base philosophical argument because it's true they're lawless. There's nothing preventing him from doing anything in that environment, but he has no ability to act on
but
his
you know what he
Jonathan,
does
that's
have?
right.
Consciousness.
Well, sure.
So that's a natural rights doctrine that I will defend.
Well, I mean, I like consciousness too. The only point that I'm getting at is when it comes to people's freedom and the ability for people to protect their freedom, this is what I care about. It's what Marx cared about. If you actually read what he wrote, and
I've read Das Kapital. I've read the Manifesto.
Then
And guess what? He was right about some things.
then you know.
But not everything.
He didn't
And he was
talk
really wrong.
about equality. He didn't write on equality. He
Shut
wrote
up.
on freedom because he believed that society was a very complex, interlocking network of systems that in some ways liberated men and in other ways enslaved
But do
them.
you know what he got wrong? He got wrong that sometimes people can be free for other devices that they are not able to regulate. They can be free not from alcoholism, drug addiction, some sort of any other sort of perverse addiction. The idea of freedom is a very libertarian.
But I
view of
agree with
freedom.
that, though.
No, I know
So
you do.
The greatest society.
I say that. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just the greatest society is one where a man is born, and there are as few things as possible preventing him from doing whatever he wants for the rest of his
I
life,
totally disagree.
so long as, of course, he doesn't deprive others of the ability to do the same.
So I think that's a miserable society.
Freedom?
No, that's not freedom. That's licentiousness or degeneracy. That's chaos.
What is degeneracy? I like men.
How about pedophilia?
Okay. Well,
You
obviously
said
that would
whatever
infringe-
he wants. Is
No,
is
as long as
pedophilia?
That's
don't-
not what he said. Literally, how did you get through college and not be able to listen to someone say that sentence and misunderstand it to such an extent that your response is, what about pedophilia? The end of his statement. Okay, here's the sentence, and I believe this too. Freedom is allowing people to live their life in any way they want, as long as I'm not going to do it a third time, that would be annoying. It doesn't, however you want to say it, harm other people, violate others' freedoms, take other people's rights away. Okay? So easy to understand. You can still disagree with that. You might say, I value mandating, certain lifestyles more than that, so no. But you can even make an argument like why that would be better for society. But to misunderstand and go, okay, so within a parameter that says you can't harm other people or take away other people's freedoms and rights, pedophilia would be okay, right? No, that would definitely be harming somebody else.
Freedom
As
vouch?
long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. I'm sure you could believe, I would believe.
Well,
that
so then,
infringes
so
on the
there
rights
are
of
limits
others.
on freedom, is what you're saying. It's not this Wild West campaign.
as
So
long
where do
as
you
you-
get those limits from?
Well, obviously, you would probably have to have a pretty complex interlocking legal system to determine what we agree upon as like a reasonable limits we can place on people.
It's so simple. Oh my God, it's so simple. He says, well, how do you determine? How can I be free if someone else is preventing me from being free? So then you just set up a society where when people violate others' freedoms, then that's the times that freedom is allowed to be taken away. So that's the argument for vaccination. By being so much more able to, like, by increasing the death rate to such an extent from COVID by not getting vaccinated, you're taking other people's rights away because you're increasing the likelihood that they'll die through your actions. So that's why people say, here's a time where, and I'm not for actual mandating, which would be this example, but that's the argument. And then definitely if it's just mandating to get into certain places and stuff like that, yeah, you're violating someone else's rights by threatening their life with this virus. So we are going to, leverage in certain ways our power so that you'll get vaccinated.
Behavior. We have that now to an extent.
No, I know. So like pedophilia, bad.
That
right?
would be a bad thing.
Okay, kidnapping,
That would be a bad thing.
rape.
That would be a bad thing.
Why do you think those things are?
Ugh. He literally already established, yes, if it harms somebody else or if it takes someone else's rights away. I think, Mr. Charlie, kidnapping someone is taking their rights away.
Are bad.
I think they're bad because you're stripping other people of the ability to do that which they will. With all those examples, you're inflicting harm on a person.
How about dealing drugs?
I think that dealing drugs is a person's freedom, as is taking a
But
person's.
you're taking
What about dealing drugs to kids?
Dealing drugs to kids? I think I would disagree with that, probably because I think there's something exceptional about addictive substances and children. That being said, I think a lot of stuff would apply to children specifically. Contract law. Kids can't sign contracts.
So
There's
do
nothing
you
wrong
see what
with
I'm getting at?
contracts.
Eventually, you do agree that a conservative
Yes.
framework is necessary.
Now we're in the conversation. Okay, well then these are real examples. Why is it that kids and what age should they know? Like, for example, I think it's totally fine for kids' rights to be taken away in parents forcing them to stay in the house. So, they can't run away, whatever. So that's a meaningful discussion. But when you're talking about rape and kidnapping,
That's a conservative framework. Because there are other things I care about that you would always disagree with, like collective ownership of the means of production.
Yeah, I totally disagree. I think private property and freedom are linked together.
Which would give workers the most freedom possible.
We've definitely gone along because it was just
But this has
so
been
it was
helpful,
fantastic.
right?
It was
It
fantastic.
feels like it's been 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I know,
Keep
right,
going.
right. And Ian, you've collected a bunch of
Jesus,
great.
50, yeah, at least.
So right.
I'm gonna use the restroom. Is that okay?
Away.
All right, yeah, go do it to
It'll
it.
take like 100 seconds.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
tiny.
I'm kind of interested in what you think about. I think humans are inherently destructive by nature, and that if you took a human and put him in a room with a bunch of small animals and plants, over time, his hunger, purely because of hunger, ultimately, he would destroy and consume all of those animals and all of those plants. And then if you put another human in there, one of those would eventually just.
I hate to be mean, so I'll start out with a compliment. You know what they say? It's a compliment sandwich you got to do. I like his hair. It's like very long and nice. I think the glasses are good. I like the sound of his voice. Okay. See, I put like 3 slices of bread. Now I'm going to put the criticism meat. I hate. You can do whatever you want, and philosophy, great, do it, so fun. But I hate when it seems like somebody just realized what philosophy was type thing, which was like me 2 seconds ago. I'm not judging, but I am. And it's kind of like the phrase, people who smell their own farts and like it or whatever the phrase is. Ugh. Like so into the words that are coming out of their mouth. I think I sit at night and think a lot like Plato that humans are. I'm being mean. We've all had. Literally what I've been doing on this entire live stream is similar little, rants about thoughts that I have. So I'm not even judging, but it is something I see a lot. Is like, I'm gonna come up with this unique way to phrase something, and it's just a real new way to look at the world, and I guess I'm smart for it. And right here, I think humans are inherently destructive. It's because I think he's saying that they want to survive is fair, and that's all that he's talking about. If you're in a room with an animal, you'll eat it. Or with another human, you'll eat it eventually. for survival, sure. Just a little bit, I don't know, mister.
Destroy and consume the other human.
I do think that we are maybe inherently expansionist. I think that might be a defining trait of our species.
Life.
We conquered the world, and God willing, we survive. 1,000 years from now, we'll conquer the stars, and that's unique to us. Other animals don't do that. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe everything would have been better.
They do this. Every animal does. The issue is
Build
that
spaceships?
See, Vaush is doing such a good job of engaging. If that guy said that, I'll go, Kind of like when you're talking to someone and you're just kind of letting them go and making sure you give some verbal cue that you're still listening every once in a while so they don't think you're ignoring them. It's just kind of like, yeah, crazy. Huh. Totally. 100%.
no expansion.
Oh, yeah. But
Not build spaceship. That'd be cool though. You know, dolphins taking off.
over time, the limits of their abilities constrain them to a given area, a given population. But we clearly haven't been kept in that way.
Intelligence has
too
separated
smart.
us from that from the equilibrium. A lion chasing a gazelle.
Shut
the gazelle,
up.
runs faster. The lion has to run faster. The zebras and the stripes are confusing. Some get away, some don't. There's a natural adaptation process. We know what evolution is. But humans, we adapt instantly. We are like, hey, that bird's flying. I got an arrow.
And we have, and there are. I just want to say, talk about evolution.
Are we just realizing that? Sorry. Okay. I'm not going to be annoying. It is very interesting. And it really is that humans are so intelligent and have a consciousness. That's all very interesting. And I love talking about that type of stuff. So I don't know why I'm getting irked. I think it's because when it's in the context of a political discussion, it's just a little nothing. No, whatever. This is interesting. I'm being so overcritical.
Yeah, not controversial topic.
No, well, in a non-controversial way. Believe it or
Yes.
not, you'll have to catch the behind-the-scenes release. I just want to say that I don't have much optimism for the human condition. I'm not like a huge optimist about this. We are, I think, very potentially destructive. I just think that we also experience, or we're better receptive to reward incentives than any other thing.
So Ian's got a bunch of questions.
Yes.
So for everybody who's super chatted, we were having Ian, we mentioned in the beginning, go through and try and find really good questions. A lot of people are saying really awesome things. I want to read one that's not a question real quickly from Adam Schrader, who said, so far this whole conversation reminds me of friendly bar discussions 10 years ago. I miss that world. Thank you, Vaush and Charlie, for being excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think this was really good. They were both really respectful, to each other and let each other kind of articulate what they wanted, and it was pretty chill.
Tim for steel manning. You all have leader
But some of these
demeanors.
questions lead to really
I know
good
a lot of people disagree with each other, especially in the
discussion,
chat.
so that's
Not
why
everyone
I'm
gets along, but
continuing it.
these are, I think it's a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Charlie.
Ian's got some questions.
Let me bring them to you.
And then afterwards, if we still have time permitting, I would like to do the member segment and then personally be more involved than I've been for the most part.
Sorry, we've been.
Well, no, that was kind of the point.
Back to arm
There's
wrestling.
There's a million things. I'm like, and I did interject. You guys know I did.
Just toggle to the right to go through all of them.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Ian.
these are some pretty good ones. So you just said press. Okay, there we go. So Ian's pulled some super chats. M asks, please ask each guest if they agree or disagree with the statement. Abortion breaks the non-aggression principle and why.
I mean, obviously, yeah. I think abortion is immoral, and we should do our best to eradicate it.
I don't really believe in the NAP. I understand people's discomfort with abortion. I think that unfortunately it's a legal necessity as a byproduct of some very compelling personhood arguments I've heard in the past, which I would have to read up on again before reciting.
Can I ask a question? When do you think life begins?
I don't know what life is.
So how about your life? You have life right now. When did your life begin?
I don't remember the first 6 months of my life. I genuinely don't
Looking
know.
at the development of a human life, when would you say that begins?
I know when human bodies develop. The genuine answer that I have is that I think that it's always going to be dictated somewhat by intuition. The intuitive answer from me is life begins at birth. That's my intuitive. If you asked me, like, that's what feels right, but I'm sympathetic to other perspectives.
What about when DNA is formed?
Well, that would be a conception, right? Or at least...
So I don't really want to get into this right now, but I'm going to. I am, number one, I'm so sick of listening to the left and right argue about abortion, and I'll explain why. It's not for the normal reasons. I'm thinking, I'm going to do a video at some point. We'll see when it actually gets done. It's going to be titled something like Luke solves the abortion issue or something annoying like that. And what I'm going to get into is a few elements. First, establishing how much we talk past each other on this issue. Other ones, like at least people definitely they're still advocating or acting in bad faith and making horrible arguments, all those things in other topics, but at least like they're arguing with each other. But with the left and right talking about abortion, it's like we're standing in a room, but there's a wall in between us. Okay? And here's the room. Here's the wall. The left's over here in this side of the room, screaming at this, and then the right's over here. And it's just so unproductive. And the reason for that is the left doesn't even really, I guess, try to understand what the right's saying, and then the right doesn't try to understand what the left is saying. Whereas other issues, they try to understand it enough to argue with it. But on this one, they don't. They don't even like learn enough about the other side's view to argue with it. And like, for example, people on the left a lot of times say, oh my God, all pro-life people, they just want to control women, and they want to do forced, like, want to make women birthing factories, and even the whole, like, they want to control your body, and the women have the right to choose about their body. They should have control over their body. And it's like, you have to recognize, though, the right believes that there's a different body that already has its own rights. So just like how, you know, you wouldn't say that a mom can kill her baby once it's out of the womb. Like, that's what they believe. So, like, why are we, like, at least let's explain, you know, if you're pro-choice for the bodily autonomy reason, explain what that means, instead of just screaming that, like, they don't want women to have control over their body, because they believe that there's another body that they're advocating for with the same rights as the woman's body, because they think it's the same as, like, a toddler. You know what I'm saying? Like, but then the same thing, the right doesn't, I've never heard a right-winger, like, break down. Oh, no, I heard one debate where they were both really honest to each other, and they didn't break down, like, what the actual argument is that left-wingers make about if something is biologically, and different left-wingers believe different things, but, like, if a being is biologically dependent on another, then the other being has the right to make that decision, because it's still a part of their vessel in that nature. And the analogy that I think is most convincing is, if you got in a car wreck with a person, I think Vaush said this once, but I had heard it one time before in this morality quiz. If a person got in a car wreck with someone else and it caused that other person to, and it was the first person's fault. So, like, let's do this. I get in a car wreck with Vaush. Okay. I drive to Portland and I get in a car wreck with him. That's where he lives now. That's why I said that. And it causes him to get into a medical state where he needs to be attached for, I don't know, let's just pick a random number, 9 months, okay, to me, to get blood from me to stay alive. Like, we're the same blood type, and that's the only way he has to stay alive is for 9 months. He has to be attached to me. The argument people make is because of, like, the belief that bodily autonomy is, you know, important enough as a societal principle that I should still have the right to say, like, no, you can't stay attached to me. Even though I'm the one who got in the car wreck, like, I did the bad thing, you know, I swerved or something. It's my fault that you're in this state, but the state still doesn't have the right to keep me connected to them. Like, you don't have to agree with that, but now you kind of see, oh, okay, I see why. Because then that would get a little risky. Like, how far does it go? Can we mandate that people give their kidney if it would save someone's life and stuff like that? There's a whole discussion to be had, and it would be an interesting discussion, but we don't have it because one side's going, you hate women and want to control their body, and the other side's going, and you want to kill babies and spike them on the pavement, you know? So regardless of where you fall on it, I think we can all agree, like, maybe could we have a little bit more of productive conversation about why we believe the other things? And then the second aspect of the video second aspect that I want to touch on, which I will do in the future video, is so if you don't want abortion to happen, which I think most people, whether or not they think it should be legal, think like, hey, it'd be great if we didn't need as many abortions to happen. Because usually that's a representation of, well, first, those people aren't going to exist, but then also, like, the people they would have turned into. But then also, what was the also, guys? Oh, also, that usually that's a signifier for other societal ills, such as poverty. And so, if like you didn't need to have barely any abortions, like that would be probably a sign that things, but it wasn't illegal. That might be a good sign. And so if you really care about minimizing abortions, then you would actually do the things that minimize them, which, like I said, it's addressing poverty. It's sex education in schools, because a lot of teen pregnancies happen and get aborted. And there's a huge trend line of people not being educated enough and getting pregnant. And conservatives don't want to teach sex ed in school a lot of times. And then the other aspect is we should just have free contraceptives. That's just something you can go to, I don't know, the post office. You can get as many condoms as you want. And then also under like a Medicare for all, birth control should be included. And we should educate people. Like, if you're going to be sexually active, you should take birth control / have the male wear a condom and stuff like that. But then conservatives, the same people saying they want to minimize abortions, hate that stuff. That means we're encouraging people to be sexually deviant. Oh. And like, oh, I'll teach my kid about sex. Don't teach it in school. Yeah, but your sex ed is going to be, your body isn't able to have sex physically until you're married to someone of the opposite gender under the church. That's the only time when your body is even able to have sex. That's the sex ed that they're going to be giving. So there's just so many things that could be better about the abortion discussion that would actually give us some chance, even though I think it might be one of those that we'll never get to a resolution on. But regardless, like, hey, conservatives, in the meantime, while you're trying to make it illegal, how about you agree with us that we should encourage contraceptives, subsidize them, birth control, like deep and more than just one time in 5th grade, we should have sex education. And then we should also continue our fight to ameliorate poverty. And that will actually decrease abortions rather than whatever the heck you guys want to do.
Right after. Well, that's not what, obviously that's not the metric that I would look at.
How about heartbeat?
That's 6 weeks? No.
As
earlier.
early as 6 weeks, could be as early as late as 6 weeks, early as 25 days.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no. These are interesting metrics. I think that my understanding of consciousness is more of an emergent property of experience, more so than it is. I would have to reread. It's been a while since I've read up on this.
You know what I love is you said, when do you think life begins? That was your question. I love how framing changes everything. Watch. Ask me now.
Tim, when does life begin?
I think it was when proteins formed and started self-replicating in the primordial. Oh, you mean conception?
Right.
You see, like it's interesting how framing changes everything.
To me, it's more. I guess for me, because like.
Yes, Tim, but also they were already on the topic of abortion. So I think when you ask a question that's always asked around abortion, I think it's really cool framing. It's can change everything. Like, you can perceive it to be a completely different topic completely. Good insight, Timothy.
Any cell in our body is alive. There is life and DNA in any bit of skin off my fingertip.
I wasn't meaning to poke at you or anything.
I know.
The framing
So
of
yeah,
only say
when,
to me-
when does a life worthy of protection begin?
That's a difficult question. To me,
that's a better way to word it.
To me, that has to be a legal question because protection has to be arbitered by an entity, and it can't be. And for me, that would probably be at birth. I've heard people make convincing philosophical arguments that there are times after birth when you're not even a person, and I've heard people make convincing arguments for conception. But if you're talking about a legal entity, the birthing seems to be the line that's the easiest to distinguish.
Also, I can respect more if you genuinely, like, if you believe either that conception or viability, like those two make sense to me. The people who say no abortion, and a lot of conservatives do this, no abortion except for rape, incest, or the risk of the mother's life. The risk of the mother's life, I see how you can make a principled argument for that, because maybe we agree that a conscious, independent, whatever being is more valuable than the fetus. But the rape, incest thing, if you think it's an actual human, then obviously we all agree that, like, it's a worse, more devastating situation when someone got pregnant because of those things. But why does that, if you genuinely believe conception, when, like, the life should have rights, then why does that change based on how the life got rights? Does that make sense? It's so confusing. Like, you think, no, that's a baby. You're killing an actual baby if you abort. But unless that baby was formed in certain ways. Like, huh? That's why, to me, either conception or viability. Like, conception, I see how you could make some sort of argument, principles, morally, and then I see viability. But then that middle ground is confusing. And this is why I'm someone who doesn't think it's always the right thing to just be in the center of everything in politics. Sometimes there's just a correct opinion.
And there are other legal concerns as well. But this is an issue that I think I always support, like, a pro-choice argument. The philosophy behind it is something I'm a little more.
I'm just
philosophy.
So is it more on the size of the being, or the level of development of the being, or the environment of the being, or the degree of dependency? Which one do you think?
Yeah, it's the size
out of those things.
I
is
think
the reason
small
why you say
babies
birth?
should
I'm
just
I
be.
think the degree of dependency is legally worthwhile, but for consciousness, I think it's more about it being an emergent property of experience.
So is it okay then if we just basically pull the plug on all the people that are kind of comatose and cucumbers on machines? They really don't have self-consciousness, and they're very dependent.
Well, I mean, legally we do believe that, because if you have
It's very tricky in the courts.
It is, but it's not the same as murdering a person. If there's conservatorship.
So, okay, Jonathan said here in Oklahoma, they're passing a full abortion ban unless the mother is going to die. I guess, to be fair, they didn't make the rape exception. So, now that I think about it for just a second, they also should I wish they would address the argument of, like, abortions. The number of abortions are still in the same ballpark when you make it illegal, and people just end up getting really unsafe ones. I just want to hear, like, an actual honest response to that. But to what you're saying, that thing too, that doesn't make sense to me. If you genuinely believe it's already an independent being with rights, how do you choose between, if they're both the same? That's what they say, right? They're both identical in moral consideration and the rights that they have as a life. Then why would the mom be chosen over the baby? The baby's younger. Like, I don't know. I feel like I try harder to understand, because, like, I have a lot of pro-life people in my life. And so, and they're amazing. And, like, as far as they're amazing people. So I don't agree with a lot of people on the left who say, if you're pro-life, it means that you're just obsessed with controlling women. You hate them. And I really do my best to try to understand kind of the views that are at the table. But I don't understand how you can make a principled argument that makes, like, that's morally consistent about that. I took a morality quiz, guys, that tests how, like, morally consistent you are. And it says the average person gets 78% on this quiz. I got 100% in my moral consistency.
Over a person who's brain dead, there are instances where you will be allowed to pull the plug.
You can't do so without an arbiter, though. You can't just call in and say, just pull the plug. That is murder.
You can just yank it, of course.
You have to get approval and process.
Yeah. But it does indicate that legally and morally there is ambiguity with regards to the relationship.
But it shows that
between
there's
right
an
to
arbiter,
life.
though. That you have to go through a system of checks. I didn't mean to derail Tim.
Sorry,
I want to make sure we can get to as many questions
Of course.
as possible. That was great. That was great. Camilla Mamani says, WTF, a libertarian socialist is like a meat eater vegan.
Libertarianism.
Hey, how about he's about to explain, but how about you like know what you're talking about and don't just think because you heard libertarian was on the right one time that it's doesn't actually have meaning that you can learn about. Libertarian socialist does make sense. And I've heard so many people say that. Because I've mentioned to people that he's a libertarian socialist and they've gone like, isn't that a contradiction? Words have meaning and you can find out the meaning of them. Do the quiz on stream. Okay, I'll do. Well, now that I know the answers, I'll try to find a different morality quiz. That would be fun.
Was actually a left-leaning ideology. It was co-opted in the early 20th centuries by capitalists. But actually before that, libertarianism was exclusively in the purview of socialists. And I believe what they believed, that freedom is the greatest human good as long as it doesn't infringe upon others, and that the best way to achieve that freedom is through democracy. We have political democracy, flawed as it is. Economic democracy is something we should also strive for.
I'll tell you this. Left libertarian quadrant is the hardest quadrant to be in. You have the only persuasion tactics. The only...
Baltazar says, will abortion end if everyone forbids it? No.
If you're a left libertarian, which exists, you're basically saying, I like socialism. Now I have to convince people that it's the right thing and they'll agree with me. And people just won't. People won't.
I find left libertarians less threatening to the American way of life.
Oh, thank you.
Because you have a general
If you missed that, yeah, pretty much. You can be socialist and think that the government should act in a somewhat authoritarian fashion to enact that socialism. That's like real big government socialism. But then you can also believe that it should all be done through very democratic means and should emphasize the individual rights and liberties and freedoms of people. And the whole mission behind it is to maximize freedom. And they just define freedom differently than like Charlie would, because you can't truly be free if you're forced in some sense to work, for example, because you need to you need to buy food, so you're forced to work, so you're not really free. Like, it's a different type of freedom than what conservatives believe. But that's why like a libertarian socialist is a thing, and it's different than kind of a more authoritarian socialism. Which we see a lot of people who are like really into the Soviet Union and stuff on the left. Like, what's happening with that, guys? And that, I guess that's trickled over to them supporting Russia. Then isn't creating rules so that women can do it without risking their life the best choice? So that's part of what goes into the pro-life belief. The argument that would be made against that is, if you forbid murder, will it still happen? Yes. So should we find out a way to do safe murder? Again, that's my point. If you believe that if you believe the fetus is an actual living, I mean, obviously it's living, but it has the same moral consideration and independent rights from the mother. Tankies, yeah, that's it. Then it's the same as murder. So then we're not going to prevent all murder, but we should still make it illegal. That's like the argument, right? But then if you believe in bodily autonomy, or some people just, it's the utilitarian thing of societies are sort of objectively better off as far as organizational efficiency and stuff. And whenever you're able to have some sort of family planning. But that one doesn't convince me so much either. The strongest one for me is bodily autonomy.
Taste for authoritarianism.
Well, for what it's
The
worth.
right has money. They're like, well, you want to agree with me?
In regard to biological dependence, I should say.
but I can give you money. And they're like,
The left does too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just want to say, for what it's worth, there are some people who call themselves socialists who I actually think would agree probably more with you than with me. Like people who support China, for example. China's not socialist. It's a rampant
Yeah,
capitalist state.
it's a
largely-
cronyist state is really what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, whatever you want to call it, it's certainly not what I want, you know. So there are people who would defend that, and I can't help but think, like, okay, these are conservative, what would you call them, traditionalist social positions, and
Yes.
you defend, you know, a strong state with a strong common will towards the betterment of the state and a free market. I don't know, you know, maybe that'll be what would they call
I know
it?
I'm pausing a lot, but I find this discussion so interesting. Balthasar said that is mostly a morality answer. So isn't it better letting doctors and science decide when life starts? Obviously, I'm someone who likes to base a lot of my opinions off of those stated individuals, but I mean, life, it just depends on, but because we're not talking, that's not a doctors and science question, because we're not talking about life like the scientific meaning, like a plant is it's living, because they would give you the answer of the different, like what we learn in science, the different requirements to be living, which is very different than what we mean in the political sphere of a life, which is a living being that warrants legal protection and individual rights, I'll say. Like, that's what we mean by life. Whereas if we ask science to figure it out for us, the answer is the same thing that makes a dog like a life, you know, a living being. And doctors, same thing. They could answer different questions for you, like, when is this life viable? When is this life this, that, or the other? When does it have a heartbeat? Stuff like that, or conscious. When is it conscious? So they could answer questions, but as far as the actual question of, okay, so then when should it get individual rights? That's just going to be that's why this is so much more difficult than like climate change or something, because the answer is a societal one. So.
Brown Alliance? No, I'm joking.
In a way,
So I've got a question for Charlie.
Sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Alden's theory?
No.
You're not? Oh, okay. Then I guess I won't answer that question then. All right. Then the next question would be for both of you is, what is the single biggest political issue for each of you? And Charlie, you want to answer first?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Political
I'm sorry,
issue-
for 2022.
Oh, like, I could
Yeah.
take that any way, I guess, right? You know, what should Republicans run on, I guess, or like,
Yeah,
just what is the biggest issue? Yeah, I mean, man, it's, I'd say the way we do elections in our country is definitely up there. Big tech is massive. Immigration is huge. But I think even something more fundamental that I was trying, I think we almost achieved it tonight, which is that we're about to tear this country apart. And I think dialogue is something that is so beautiful and is so complex and almost spiritual in nature that if we don't have dialogue with people that you fundamentally disagree with, then there's really not a middle ground until you start ripping each other apart. And I'm really afraid of that.
What's your
Agreed.
what's the biggest issue of 2022?
I agree that the political rift is almost insurmountable seeming. The last time we had one this bad was pre-Civil War, and we didn't really fix it. We just had a civil war, and people were still mad after. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think we're going to have a civil war, by the way. There are some people. I think that at the end of the day, there's a big difference between the problems we're told to care about and the problems we're willing to fight about. And I'm not entirely sure if I know where those lines are, but I know there's a difference. With regards to what I'd care about, for me, it has to be climate change. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at this stuff, but like you can take a look at the polar ice caps. You can take a look at the weather disasters we've been having, increasing both in frequency and intensity. This isn't look, think of it this way, okay? I believe in American industry, all right? It's a little too late for us to be first comers, but if we really wanted to, we could subsidize the hell out of green energy. You think we're doing it now? Triple that, okay? Really lay the groundwork. In 20
So
years,
those were
we'll
the
be selling
interesting
the rest
things.
of the
We'll call it a day on this debate. Now it's just the kind of the Q&A. I thought that was very interesting.